It's in use right now.
I think if I have to start
Have a fun debate.
That's a low one there.
Wow. Thank you so much.
Do you need a plug or do you just do USB?
I'll just put it in my video.
Slash whatever I need to. Sure.
My phone is in terrible shape, but I
Oh,
just
I
can't
forgot.
quite yet.
There's no way I'm
Just
gonna get to all of these things, so I'm gonna get.
Yeah, I'm the same version of stuff right now, but I think like there's something like that.
Where did our Houston DCs go?
All left. You're ahead with that.
What side is LW?
At
Are they reading Dark Magic? Huh?
the same app is familiar.
Okay, the fugitive. I think Tabroom just sent me the pairing.
Yeah, me too.
Are you kidding?
Would y'all prefer email chain or a flash drive type of thing?
I prefer chain.
Okay, let's do that.
I can't access the internet, but I can look at it on his computer, so.
Okay, gotcha. What's your email address?
T-Rajwani, T-R-A-J,
Mm-hmm.
W-A-N-I,
Okay.
at Gmail.
Cool. How many of y'all? Justin? I don't have yours, Baruch.
TIMBAROUCH@gmail.
We're missing Miller.
Always already.
Shocking.
word is the best text harangue ever. I just got one for.
Well, the thing said the round started at 1:30.
He's still lucky.
And you're really late. Yeah.
Can I get some paper?
Can you give me extra paper? Can you?
You actually might need more paper than you're expecting to. Spoiler alert.
It's a decent stack. You had a chance to take notes here, so let's try.
Yeah, this will be.
She said it was midterm.
Okay, everyone have what they need?
Do you have a speech up?
Give me 1 second.
Alright, just let me know. Got it?
Yep.
Alrighty.
Okay.
Dominant discourse surrounding public perception and consideration of drone strikes is best characterized by a single word: apathy. Hughes 12. For example, say you are watching the news with the roommate and the news anchor talks on a monotone about the deaths of civilians in a Pakistani market by a drone strike, and your roommate immediately changes the channel. Your roommate doesn't understand the devastation any more than the anchor does, although the drone operator of all people probably knows the extent of the devastation. They hide the truth from themselves. The pilot, the enthusiastic anchor, your roommates, they are all complicit. All your students to bear witness to the problem, segregation, hate in the Vietnam War. Film and promotes a community of acknowledgement like the college classrooms. It is of this very nature the violence of the war. There's not a law community of acknowledgement. Co-miners, co-senators, many more were calling for a truth when they wrote letters. The president demanded the criteria which is the infamous kill list. Unless we become conscious of the community, the truth of the violence we've been creating we are locked into violence that we cannot escape. Ambivalence towards drones as a technology of war culminates in rampant civilian casualties and unconstrained warfare. Booth 13. Virtual may perhaps be the only means by which intervention can be conducted to spatial distance renders the risk of those intervening virtual wars created the belief that the war can be clean, interwoven is the thought that war can be carried out with no consequences to civilian drones have resulted in 10 civilian deaths for every target insurgents in the war. On terror, there is no distinguishable enemy, creating an environment on which anyone can be implicated for terrorist activities. This warfare seems to emotionally detach the aggressor and increase the likelihood of civilian deaths. Distance is integral to the dehumanization and the violence that comes with it. The outsiders are distanced and thus reduced to mere life exposed by violence, susceptible to meaningless anguish. Targeted killings legitimized by geographic privilege. Public support is maintained despite opposition because it's easy to write off people in different countries as ethically secondary, asserting the implications of that double standard is key to confront the privilege and break down apathy. At least so 12. You can't have one progressive movement within only one country and ignore those who with labor must be exploited and maintained as long as they're outside the system. How do you think calling for a president that increases drones attacks on brown people sounds to brown people when ignore discourse supports of the African American political base? How cynical is that? How to hollow out the struggle for African American nationalism, symbolic pride? We don't have to worry about it. You aren't them. You aren't the ones who will be affected. You'll never be. What about geographic privilege in which every American shares? Thus, we contend that the United States Congress should revoke funding for targeted killing operations. Revoking funds is the only emphatic and legally robust check on executive power. Fisher 97. Congress repeatedly surrenders its power to the president by declining challenge the growing spending. At discretion of the president's assume if Congress will work from its owners to pass legislation telling the president may not use funds. That is the end of it. If you want to reestablish the fundamental principles established by the framers, U.S. policy must be conducted only with funds appropriated by Congress law. The president to carry out policy with private contributions will create the union of persons who are firing. The person that through its danger, Secretary of State repeated the idea of using non-appropriated funds. Members of Congress except a lack of institutional self-confidence. They do not function like a co-equal. If members of Congress want to participate in questions where they must do so through explicit statutory commands. The framers to knock away Congress to release non-binding declarations. Public consent is manufactured by de facto government monopoly on truth. Challenging legal authority interrupts those narratives and politicizes targeted killing angles in SAS 13. War set resource destroys the bodies and appropriate public discussion. Of course, war is nothing new. What is new is the lengthening cause both human and economic rhetorical claims. Critics must demystify the war, not merely exercise their critical jobs, but to instruction and send public so like the world we desire to create at its best criticism of war embraces its pedagogical end. We cannot understand the war on terror without seriously considering the injunction to go on vacation and leave the war making to the professionals. The violence is more about a landscape in which resistance is pointless for other rhetoric aimed at it and employing the rhetorical sensation. A second category, the names to cultivating a sense of promoting a glazed over half acceptance of the inevitability of war. Such rhetoric display a war on such a way that it cannot be contested. Many opposed to the war simply convince himself that dissent was pointless. Authority play rhetorical trump cards to stifle dissent and make a critique tantamount to opposing the truth, which few will do, teaching citizens that opposing war is futile. Framing a public discussion facilitates acquiescence both on the grounds on which war is justified and the instruments which war suggested the essence of this new world rhetoric. Authorities tell us, don't worry, we've got this. Acquiescent rhetoric facilitate war by shutting down deliberation. Scholars have to bring the war out into the open so that null effects and question the grounds means and ends by making the seemingly uncontestable. Critics can invent a pedagogy that would otherwise would reactivate and acquiesce in public. False dichotomy between legal and political responses bolsters apathy and ignores that society does have agency to impose legal demands. Political checks alone are insufficient. Cole 11. Posner and Vermeule have argued that political checks are all there are when it comes to returning executive power. They maintain the Congress and the law itself cannot constrain, but the political forces have been at least suggesting of well-formed legislative checks that not tell the whole story. where the alternative is not politics but a more complex interplay of law, politics, and culture. Posture and free meal simultaneously underestimate the constraining force of law and overestimate the influence of political limits. Sounding like critical legal studies adherence, they sweepingly claim the law is so indeterminate as to constitute only a facade, but that approach is regards the role of the law plays without coming to a headlock and have a disciplining effect long before kids, even when no case is filed. Officials cannot know in advance executive orders take legal limitations. Say they know that claims of illegality can undermine their objectives. Checks will often turn on the strength of civil society if there are watchdogs focused on exclusive actions ready to bring illegal context to attention. The law will have effect with actual court decisions. While fiat might not be real, accepting our discussion of the state as a heuristic and not as a descriptor creates a toolkit that best recognizes the contingency of politics. Zanati 14. Scholarship uses governmentality as a heuristic tool to explore modalities of government and address their effects in the context where they are deployed. Other adopts this notion as a descriptive tool to acknowledge the globally oppressive features. Scholars who use government as a heuristic to conduct inquiries based on practices of government and resistance. These include oppressive trajectories and the ways in which strategies and resistance are contingently enacted. The distinction between governmentality as a heuristic and as a descriptive tool is central for debating political agency. Governmentality as a descriptive tool relies on the same ontological assumptions of the literal order and then reifies a substantialist ontology, reinforces a liberal conceptualization of subjects and power and stifles reimagining political agency on different grounds. Power is imagined as a mighty charge, how the agency is portrayed as a quest for liberation. Modest conceptualizations of political agency question the overwhelming instability of the state. Political action has more to do with playing the cards that are dealt with us, how to produce practical effects in difficult contexts than with building idealized new totalities where perfect conditions might exist. The political ethics that results waste political choices with regard to the consequences they produce in the context where they are made rather than universal normative aspirations. Our strategy is not one that seeks to succeed at all costs, but rather channels the process of competition into a productive politics, retaining a form of argumentative disagreement, retains debate's radical potential crossway. One needs to distinguish between agonistic rhetoric that is merely succeed at all costs and agonistic rhetoric that uses competition to accomplish something greater. Some are psychologically defeated by it. It's not a way for them to gain the hearing, or way to negotiate, or way to resolve conflict, or a way to learn, or a way to gain self-knowledge. It comes to the hatred of arguments because constantly being defeated by those who will them with virtuosity, not a problem addressed by argument. It requires action to keep space open for individual development that replace our dislike of conflict with a dislike of consensus. Instead, how social and institutional identities determine how and when to think and act. Lack of capacity for being hospitable to competing perspectives. No, whereas the capacity for agonistic rhetoric, a qualification for participation to say that is not a kind of state that everyone is taking changes, not to confine human beings to a current historical situation and educational system that are not the results but the cause of this incapacity. The point is to change our educational practices to amplify the attractiveness of agonistic rhetoric, where it might affect those who are incapable of transforming those that are deliberately risk perspectives. Needs to understand the perspective of others, but significantly undervalued when cultural and political economic conflicts are too easily conceptualized on the model of a clash of civilization, which only balance can adequately address because individuals vary so greatly in their experiences of argumentative discourse and fractures along multiple and unsystemic lines of race, gender, and so on. Individual teachers must address individuals the best they can. They issue on a political level is always to fight keep this public sphere open. Speaking well is the different from speaking persuasively. Success lies in the continuing agreement for the conflicting parties to persevere in argumentation and go on testing against each other. We play to win because that is how the playing gets accomplished. Rhetoric leads not to an ultimate truth but to decisions, yet these must be considered later. Continuing that controversy must be possible. Political polemical agonism helps in societies in which power keeps on to debate. Argumentation can be a way of having conflict that might otherwise be carried out in actual violence or some kind of overt domination. One can always take the critical position and search out domination lurking behind every concrete experience of peace, but a discourse that sees only domination, agonistic rhetoric, and so has to seclude itself in de-individualization to only the collaborative way can dominate will not survive. The ballot is a referendum on the desirability of our engaging presidential war powers. This channels debating to a recognition of difference that otherwise erupts into open hostility. Caveats on I both understand politics and enactment of public dissent that postmodern agonism solicits the inclusion of difference, politicization of identities to participate within a common space and display themselves in the course of the debate. To win by defeating one's opponents is being displaced in favor of disruption, subversion, and perpetual contestation of existing power relations. Fixed identities. Agonism becomes conflicted to pure performativity. Post-modern agonists dissociated the agon from winning and losing, and with it the feelings of shame and humiliation, stigmatization, and inner exclusion. Also lost the motivation for victory. Politicization could lead to polarization, hostility, and aggression, factionalization, violent dissolution, percentage of women, students perceived as the fatal cause of the decline of ancient democracies without an institutional architecture that drives individuals to compete by participating moves stands apart from the other theories of agonism, pragmatic rather than normative or celebratory. The value narrative agonism does not pertain merely to how inclusive it is or how many differences it incorporates in the public sphere. Agonism is to construct them as in somebody whose ideals we combat, but whose right to defend those ideals we do not question, to avoid political depoliticization and over-politicization, to keep political confrontation alive without being destroyed by it, which occupies middle position between deliberative models of rational consensus and identity politics, acknowledging the libidinal identification which seeks to curb its violent impulses, transform conflict into a form of regulated public contest in order to avoid the eruption of violent agonism into politics. This rule prevents the misappropriation of debate for the nefarious ends while channeling its potential towards targeting forces of oppression. English at all 7. We found prominent political figures to define the contours of the public debate by libertarian critics as unpatriotic, despite countless examples directed specifically at academia. There has been no outcry by college students taking the side of the terrorist and competitive debate. Tournaments and intercollegiate policies has been remarkably isolated because so few people can participate in these debates. Virtually no one observes them. The isolation protects it from criticism rather than expanding American exceptionalism. Switchside debating services bulwarking against fundamentalisms of all stripes. Several prominent voices reshaping the traditional dialogue and homeland. That security come from the academic debate community. The imprint of this debate and training is evident in Tribe and Capital's contemporary interventions, which are characterized by meticulous research, sound argumentation, and a staunch commitment to democratic principles. That's a former debaters like Capital Tribe and others, and challenge the dominant discourse on homeland security. Points of the advocacy of academic debates, training ground for future advocates, progressive change. Switchside debating techniques, self-preventive supervision to bolster suspect homeland security policies, embracing intellectual experimentation, reflexivity, our heuristic, acknowledges strategies for reconstituting political agency by focusing on the particulars. 1AC recodes both theory and practices in NDT 14. Still handling the problematic aspects of assuming agency based on intention, focused on context as the yardstick for assessing political action and actions of active their agency within the space of public sphere. Intentionality becomes dynamic as the new spaces open up and tensions become irrelevant in such a dynamic world. Shifting attention from intention to context, sees agency as a redescription of existing conditions rather than the total prediction of uncertain responses to power named to the construction of new possibilities. Agency here is not imagined as a quest for authenticity imposed to a unitary leviathan and creating the better totality freed of oppression and bring about imminent social justice. Marked it imminent social justice.
Ready?
Hang on a second, I want to mark that first. Ready.
What is a dominant discourse?
Well, in the context of our app, it's one of apathy where we understand.
No. I understand what you think the dominant discourse is. I'm wondering what is a dominant discourse?
Like the definition of one? Yeah, I'm not going to define that.
It's the first phrase of the 1AC.
Yeah, and it's about the one surrounding drones. We'll talk about that as much as you want, but I'm not going to aim at like some fixed ontological definition. All of our arguments about contingency and specificity
What is
are reasons
what
why
is
it
it the
shouldn't be.
difference between a dominant and a non-dominant discourse then? What is the non-dominant discourse around drones?
In the context of, well, in the non-dominant discourse around drones, one would be that they're immoral, one would be that they're illegal. Those would be examples.
Okay, your booth evidence talks about, you have it tagged casualties and highlighted only deaths. Why that emphasis on the people that die from drones instead of the people that survive from drones?
I think you're mistaken about
I
that.
am complete. If you would like to read any line from
No,
that,
I think you're mistaken about us highlighting the word deaths as being like, oh yeah, who cares about non-death casualties?
I didn't say that you
It
didn't
also
hear. I
makes
was
the
just
claim that
wondering
there's
why.
a broader dehumanization as a result of a distancing caused by drones,
You're not
and then
answering my
applies that
question.
to a
All right,
vast area of their
Can
life.
we pause? There's a discrepancy between your tag, which is casualties, i.e. people that die and are injured by drones, and your highlighting, which is just death. Why that discrepancy?
Just dead.
So your question is,
read a
so-
line from that card that isn't just death.
I'm trying to
This is
understand
integral
your
to
question.
dehumanization
Before you
and the
answer this
violence.
question, read a line from that card that's not
Yeah,
death.
I'm trying to understand your question because you're obviously asking that for the purpose of your question. If your point is that the card says death but the tag says casualties,
Yeah.
I think you'd be misunderstanding the point of the card. Yes, the card says death, but not as a sole focus on it, just because
You're
only death
highlighting
matters,
created
but
as
rather
focus.
because
That's
that's like the
your
colloquial term we
cross-white
use.
evidence.
In fact, casualties is usually defined as death in a lot of methods, so I'm
Is
not
it?
sure why that
Perfect.
distinction is
Okay,
that powerful.
your cross-white evidence says race, gender, and so on. What are the so on identity categories?
Non-veteran privilege, various statuses of like where you are physically. We gave the example of geography. I could go on for a while, but the point is there are a lot of them.
Why do you think your author chose to group all of those distinct privileges as and so on?
Probably because of a lack of space. Like I don't think
The
that
article is like thousands of words long. They didn't have space.
like I think they were probably writing and they considered the idea that we should list every single possible form of difference, and they were like, that's not very
the
important.
last two questions I have are very related. Your Fisher evidence says it would be very problematic for the president to seek private or foreign funding for drones. Why does that mean he wouldn't?
The argument is that Congress needs to revoke that.
Congress revokes its funding. Your card says that the alternative to that would be to seek
U.S.
private.
Congress should revoke funding for targeted killing
Yeah, so
operations.
the U.S. federal government revokes the funding. What stops Obama from seeking private donors or foreign countries like
Legality.
Pakistan?
It is illegal for him to
Your
use
card says
funding
it
for
would be
drones.
problematic. It doesn't say it would be illegal.
And then it says that explicit statutory commands are the best way to do that, as opposed to non-binding declarations.
Okay,
i.e.
we're going to have them read
appropriations
that
bill
afterwards, and
where-
they're going to say Houston was right. Geographic privilege, does that exist inside the debate community?
Yeah. We're all here. We're not in Pakistan.
That was. Sure. Taylor's heart is in Pakistan.
It'll be 5 off.
Oh yeah. Is it all paper?
Yep.
Okay.
I'll flip
Yeah,
up
I'll
the chair, I
just-
guess.
Awesome,
Or if
that's
you
fine.
want to move here, I can flip.
No, that's fine. I'll just shuttle back and forth through that.
Alright.
Can I get a few more sheets of paper? That's all.
Piece of paper for each.
Ready? A interpretation, defunding is not a restriction on authority. Paulson and 10. Some folks mistakenly take this to mean that Congress will rule more power as appropriation power. Not at all. The power of appropriation is merely Congress's trump card shoot out power, a different and substantive power, but a powerful one that Congress may employ to effectuate in other constitutional powers, including a substantive constitutional power to initiate war. Defunding does not deauthorize a resumption of funding would return the president in practical ability to continue to wage war without need to reauthorization. There remains a legitimate debate over the propriety of Congress using its appropriation power so to leverage it into impairment of the presidential commander-in-chief. Class powers who would be seen to be a part of the separation of powers. In violation, they revoke funding. They don't deauthorize preferred ground. All of our ableism links are to the authority of the president, not the funding, and this means you should vote negative of presumption. Foreign or private funding fills in, which means the executive will just circumvent the plan. There are fresher evidence in the cross-sex now. Is the voting issue topicality is the only way for smaller schools like Houston to compete with teams like Michigan? The reasonability arguments are also assumed by topical version of the plan. Next framework. Our interpretation, Disabled Country by Neil Marcus. If there was a country called Disabled, I would be from there. I'd live disabled culture, eat disabled food, make disabled love, cry disabled tears, climb disabled mountains, and tell disabled story. If there was a country called Disabled, I would say she has immigrants that come to her from as far back as time remembers. If there was a country called Disabled, then I am one of its citizens. I came there at age 8. I tried to leave, was encouraged by doctors to leave. I tried to surgically remove myself from Disabled Country, but found myself in the end staying and living there. If there was a country called Disabled, I would always have to remind myself that I came from there. I often want to forget. I would have to remember in my life journey I am making myself at home in my country. And violation, the affirmative instrumental adoption of U.S. federal government action, not cripple stand, vote -1, erasure, secom 2K, universalist model of community would be founded on the willingness to reason from what the other's point of view. Universal community recognizes concrete other, however, vision assumes the desirability of commonality, which destroys difference of vision of community. Conversing alterities assumes sufficient similarity between alterities so that each can adopt the point of view of the other, implies a subjectivity that would collapse into sameness. Privileging communication assumes that all can participate in rational conversation irrespective of difference. The rationality is tended to assume by nurturing groups who do not adopt authoritative discourse necessary rational exchanges. And second, they recreate a good versus bad cripple distinction that makes access impossible. Smith 2010, the good cripple never acts about, never raises the fuss, never causes a problem, doesn't want to be a bother. In stoic face of pain, cheerful in the face of adversity, and never makes people uncomfortable. The correct model of disability, a subtle undercurrent suggests the bad cripple do not deserve help. But for members of the disabled community life is a series of constant reminders to be a better cripple. How does this play into accessibility? Great question. Accessibility deniers can come up with a variety of creative reasons for refusing accommodations too expensive. It would take too much time. It requires too much work. We don't know how to do it. How many people with disabilities are there anyway? Why should we be giving anyone special treatment? One of the most telling excuses is, well, no one bought it up. Mark that card there. Next up is a collection of poems. Poem for autobiography, Jennifer Bartlett. To be crippled means to have a window into the insanity of the able world. To be crippled means to see the world slowly and manically, to translate, to record, to adapt. To be crippled means to have access to people's fears of their own eroding. And Poet of Cripples by Jim Ferris. Let me be a poet of cripples, of hollow men and boys groping to be whole, of girls slipping toward womanhood and women reaching back, all slipping and falling toward the cabin we carry within our hidden world, a place for each to become full, whole, room for our own space to grow in ways unimaginable to the straight and the narrow, the small and the similar, the poor, normal ones who do not know their poverty. Look with care, look deep, know that you are a cripple too. I sing for cripples, I sing for you. Next up, counterplan. The United States Congress should cripple funding for targeted killing operations. It solves Harris Owen DeRuiter 12. It is important to include people with disabilities in the decision-making process so that people with disabilities are subject to the political process rather than objects of policy decision currently do not equal what's in process. Are needed to increase participation in the democratic process. And the net benefit is what you make of it. Berlant 11A, politics of country's simplicity, dimensions to make it seem just as a camera as it were. That's the most powerful pedagogy in this case related to cheerleading. That comedy can contribute in order to motivate the body politic to perform modes of intimate physical life, reciprocity in the ordinary spaces of life itself to embody the anomalies with anonymity to embody citizens, generic and not a universal cartoons to produce a body politic that is not as an abstraction, but as an embodied being whose ambition is that it is part of the ambient of society of accountability, space of belonging, whose terms are negotiated within the essential time of democracy rather than what's being redacted, rendered, and closed. Next, off is embodiment. The 1AC is performance of presumed accessibility and able-bodied privilege. Any attempt to separate the content of the 1AC from its form is a reason to vote negative. What they have said is just as important as how they have made it intelligible to themselves. As in you, Boyce 2008. This shift inquiry for representation of the body relationship in process and context. Any encounter is necessarily mediated by who's there, who's not what. They're what they bring, what they take away. Such a method while meaning making through process and space over time. They involve just as embodied relationship with that actions. What embodied knowledge and experience to be the participant brings to the encounter. What routine social and spatial practice frame the encounter. Disabled, non-disabled participant. not separate at all, have heard in the space of the encounter itself, but the impact framing disabled people in ways not of their making remains central to the investigation. And the liberal subject constituted both in and by the 1AC is necessarily able-bodied. Breckenridge and Volger, 2001. Assume the able-bodied is crucial to the smooth operation of traditional theories of democracy, distinction, subjectivity, and capital by assuming the normative human is able-bodied. Liberal theory conflates political, economic, and desire political representation with a voice in policy making the person at the center of the traditional liberal theory is body locus subjectivity whose unskilled labor may be substituted freely labor of other such individuals enabling body for granted. However, their mere possibility of a severely cognitive disabled citizen disrupts the liberal equation of representation, voice, and desire. And this debate is the link Berube 2003 mentioned a building in which political philosophers debating participatory parity, no access term, no bro, or large publication, no sole interpreters, no elevators, no special link paraprofessionals, a reasonably accurate picture of what debate over meaning of democracy actually looks like. Only people can foster equal participatory debate over the democracy can we have a truly participatory debate over what participatory parity itself means. As we think of debate, deliberate democracy as a forensic society dedicated to reaches of abstraction, debates over the meaning of participatory parity set the terms for more specific debates about the varieties of human embodiment. I think there's a very good recent text in the franchise to widen the conversation and democratize our debates to make disability central to our theories of egalitarian and social justice, compassion, simple sense of what it is to be human is better than a narrow and partial sense of what it is to be human. The more participants, the greater the chance that deliberation will in fact be transformative in such a way as to enhance our collective capacity to recognize each other as humans entitled to human dignity without a sufficient theoretical, practical kind of disability. We can have no counter democracy worthy of any of those of us who do participate in political debates have the obligation to enhance the abilities of our children and our fellow citizens with disabilities to participate in life in the U.S. as political, moral equal for the non-disabled people, both for their own good and for the good of all of us. And there, this embodied understanding of war is a link McSorley 13. Embodied have been denied in the ontology of conventional war scholarship. War is not just politics by any other means, but politics incarnate, politics experienced through bodies. It is the ontology of war, the affective, sensory, and embodied ways in which war lives and breathes. Defect theory of war that is done not consider as practice, i.e. what people actually do, and war focuses upon the body, render any demarcation of discrete war zones at times problematic, emphasizing the enactment and protection of war through affective corporeal careers and body. Suffering and somatic memories, not just the bodies of combatants and victims that are produced by centuries of war, but the bodies of veterans, witnesses, pacifists, and patriots. And they're focused on victims, victims not of drones as a link CX proof for shot 13. War images consistently produced in the media by which normalize the grand narrative of war images by destroyed building, confiscated arms and armament, or produce public consumption dead, mutilated body, charred flesh, unidentified human remains that are occupied space left over by armed men. This visual narrative of ordinary men, women, and children are non-actors or best part of supporting cast out on the stage as victims of militant violence. And this debate is always already about the identity. There's no uniqueness to any of their office. Chocolate 2002. Who am I is a question that we ask every time we speak, every time we act ever. Identities are passion, speech, and action. We speak and act from them. In a social world, others use our identity to define us, and we use it to define ourselves. These identities are already made for us to step into has been immerse ourselves in the social world. While our identities are already made, we do step into them. They're nonetheless made and not natural. But already made aspect of our identities. So now we're seeing ourselves and being seen by others. As type disabilities exist as long as human life has existed, but only recently figured into human identity. It has generally been conceived of something as that has an important person. That's not a natural part of human condition, and you should vote negative to make ableism irredeemable. The burden to solve the problem cannot be placed on us to address the problem. This themselves your responsibility. Surety 11. If we look at the problem of disabilities, then the ableism themselves has a responsibility for discrimination. May not even recognize its presence. If you look at the problem of ableism, then the ableist must question his or her orientation. The critic has to make ableism so apparent and irredeemable that one cannot practice it without incurring social castigation. The pervasive cultural ubiquity of using images of disabled bodies to inspire pity suggests the skill of the work ahead. We can perform ableist essential by using rhetoric, trustworthiness, and political action. And our alternative is to tell a story. Kauser 2005. Disability autobiography, not a spontaneous expression, but a response to the traditional misrepresentation of disability and world of Western culture deviation from modeling norm provoking demand for explanatory narrative in everyday life, whereas the unmarked case, the normal body can pass without narration. The marked case, scar, the limb, the missing limb, or the obvious presence calls for 30 people representing anomalous body that call upon to account for them. What happened to you often? Who complete stranger expectation, relieve the auditor's discomfort, expectations to conform to a culture script autobiography is a particularly important form of life writing about disability written from inside the experience, and the question involves self-representation and re-evaluation of that condition. Autobiography, disabled people can the historical subjection by occupying the subject position, and the alternative opts out of ableism. Campbell 13, the disabled body has been configured as a side of monstrosity and unthinkability, so inherently untenable that has an occasion been pronounced ritually dead. Being legal and policy discourse of disability gravitate towards the equality as sameness model, declaring disabled people should be integrated. The project of inclusion has become the conditional and normatively vacuous condition of disability acceptability or capacity of disabled people to morph ableness.
Grab for CX.
CX.
Ready?
Yeah. How do you know our subjectivity?
Excuse me?
How do you know our subjectivity?
What do you mean?
You claim that we have a liberal ableist subjectivity.
We
mean
think
the
that the
subject of the
1AC,
1AC.
yeah, the subject that is presented in the 1AC is a
How do you
liberal
know the
subject.
subjectivity of the 1AC?
The citizen subject of it, not like you.
Oh, so like we're talking about
object
us
of the
debating. Who
plan.
do you think we're talking about?
What do do you mean?
You said the
implement your
citizen
plan
subject
through
to
the
the
federal
1AC.
government. We're talking about that type of liberal citizen subject. This is a link to the plan.
The federal government isn't a citizen; it's an institution.
It's an institution
The
compromised
discourse
by its
that the
citizens.
plan calls
Okay,
for
what
is
makes? How do
between
you know?
able-bodied
How do you know
individuals.
those citizens
Ellis,
speak from point of
Ellis,
political
the
subject?
types of lawyers and the types of things that your framework answers are talking about, our argument is that the smooth operation of liberalism, i.e. that progressive progress myth that was in the 1AC, necessarily presumes an able body to make that work.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Why do you always say body in the context of ableism?
Because
do you
we don't
mean?
think there's a distinction between the mind and the body, and we think that
yeah.
distinction, that Cartesian dualism, is very dangerous and what it creates some oppression
So,
of people.
so
with
are there
invisible-
non-embodied forms of disability?
We think the mind and the body are simultaneous co-constitutive entities.
Okay,
So obviously
gotcha.
there
Yeah,
are.
so,
what
so
people would-
there's not a hard and fast distinction between them.
We think Descartes was way wrong on that.
Gotcha.
And we think that it's
Yeah,
all the same
gotcha.
thing.
Does anything outweigh topicality?
Excuse me.
Does anything come before topicality?
The topicality arguments we made were ground in presumption, so lots of things could come before that.
Okay. What's the status of the counterplans?
Well, the tuner is always going to be the voice of the disabled subject. The counterplan may or may not be. But we think.
Can I be the voice of the disabled subject?
Do you want to be?
You don't give the
depends.
2 NR, so I guess that's an irrelevant question.
Yeah,
for
but in the
arguments
1AR, can I be?
NC. Sure.
Okay, cool. Then why vote neg?
All of the reasons.
You
that
asked a
were presented.
conditionality question. Our argument
I
was
asked
that
a
2
different
NR will
question after
always
that.
be a performance of
Yeah,
the
no, and
disabled
then
body.
we went to a different question out of that. Why vote neg if I can be the,
We're gonna
Are
do
you
the
raising
better
disability
debating.
consciousness?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll have a debate about that.
Okay, gotcha.
When was the last time you talked about disability in a debate?
It depends what you mean by disability. Embodied disability, it's been a while, but we're debating this one here, so I don't see why that's relevant.
It seems highly relevant.
So hang on, we should lose because of the stuff we've done in other debates?
No, our argument is just that we
Okay,
are
that's
in the
not
process of building disability consciousness.
hang on.
That'll be a
Specific
clear-
You made the
Your
claim that
plan,
debate.
the liberal
You made the claim that
subject.
debate, no matter what.
Casualties. Yeah.
Right. You made the claim that debate is always about identity. Is it ever about anything other than identity?
Every time we speak, every time we act, our identity is always present. That is our Michelle evidence at any office.
not
The
is
contesting
subject
that
subject
next
matter of
question.
debate is obviously could be particular, but our argument is that when you present something, your identity is couched in that. The arguments that you are making cannot
When
be
you,
separated from the body.
well, this gets back to my first question. You said your identity. What
We said
how do
all
you
of
know
our-
my identity?
No. We don't know your identity. We just know that you are speaking from it.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. So why
Also-
doesn't the AF meet the Cripplestan argument? Is it just because we use the term USFG?
Yeah.
Okay, where is Cripplestan located?
Cripplestan is a place that exists out there and in here. It's in the cripple body, but it's also a place that we're striving towards.
Where doesn't it exist?
Where doesn't it exist? The federal government.
Gotcha.
That's not my government.
Mm-hmm.
Think for Did he say start time?
Yeah, I kept the clock running.
I thought he said end practice.
No, that was true.
argument about what the USFG is.
Framework.
Yep. And then the counterplan and the embodiment page.
We'll take a second of additional prep. I just want to ask you something.
Yeah.
Make sure you answer that like one its distinction about the other sources.
Yeah, no, I
Okay,
get it.
cool. That was another 10 seconds.
7:20.
Ooh.
That's just
There we go.
no, there we don't.
99 minutes is not appropriate.
I wish.
It seems like you get pretty tired.
Never.
Okay. Drones are temporally unique and outweigh their impact. The one see Booth Evans says they cause immense psychological distancing, which lowers the threshold for the use of force by assuring public apathy towards interventions because troops are require drones hover for hours over their targets, exacting immense psychological violence, reducing the persons under their gaze to bare life bombings weddings are indiscriminately bombs, and the blasts from shrapnel ensures untold violence. The one see Lizzo evidence says the recognition of geographic coverage is important to decenter current Eurocentric frames. This immense privilege is afforded to those in the United States. This isn't to say that drones are the most important injustice, but they are a problem and we need to do something about them. Ellis and I identified a strategy of creative lawyering, reformism, and using the law for its strategic effects as the best available solution to the drone problem and our ability to do something about it. Vote affirmative to endorse the normative advocacy of our 1EC and our unrelenting commitment to alter the material infliction upon violence upon those lives who have been and will continue to be ruined by drones and other forms of violence. Voting AFT does not require an exclusion of their strategy, but merely a recognition that a modicum of political engagement is necessary to do something about the problem. The 1EC Zanati evidence says that using the government as a heuristic avoids the pitfalls of being a descriptor. This recognizes that the state is an assemblage prone to the intervention of civil society, of which poetry could be a part of it, but that is not the endpoint of our politics. Now, the topicality page. We need authority. Allen, using Congress power to restrict the war power authority. The plan is a statutory restriction on authority. Hansen 90 for the power of the first Congress uses power to restrict presidential initiative. The example of the statutory restriction, appropriation, counter-interpretation, a limitation on presidential discretion, global landing when Congress places restriction on the president, so it limits the president's discretion to operation. Congress authorized Bush to attack Iraq, but confine the presidential authority to use armed forces. That restriction would not have been permitted the president to march into Baghdad. Our whole AF is a defense of our interpretation of topicality because it forces a debate over the process of implementation, which the power of the purse is integral to. The 1EC Fisher evidence substantiates that a particular question is key to AF innovation and centers the particular topic, but sure there's no risk of ground loss because we have defended legal institutions which they have links to. Obviously, in the 1EC, the argument about us erasing their identity, obviously, this links to our geography argument because it's a question of where we place that particular thing. There's no risk of ground loss. Reasonability, competing interpretations are bad. They cause a race to the bottom that decimates substantive debate. Now, the next off case.
The circumvention argument.
Oh, the circumvention argument, the 1EC evidence indicates that the plan is a hard statutory binding restriction that means there is no more funding. It also raises public consciousness over the drone issue. The 1EC is more of a method and a form of scholarship. The 1EC Fisher evidence indicates the plan's restriction is sufficient to constrain the executive and there's no risk of circumvention because we check public apathy. That's the Angles and Sauce evidence. Now, the other off the case outweighs ableism shouldn't be deployed to prevent solutions to otherwise inevitable violence. The opportunity cost of the alternative is practical solutions like the FA Mass and 13 while CDS would guard and confront Able's assumption and challenge or lose consideration having to do with pain or nevertheless a given impairment is a difficult choice and need more concrete viewpoints. The S-3 ableism offer very little guidance under the anti-dualistic sense. Even as the well-being dualism becomes arbitrary, it can be constructed as merely maintaining the dominance of those seeming variables. Agents, we have an obligation to make judgments about people well-being and act in ways that their well-being is enhanced. This is why we have a coordinated prevention programs possible. These policies are based on ableist perspective. If this is the case, then the normative use of ableism is all denying some aspects of well-being are so clear, but denial will be absurd to and so normative judgment. This way of shirking from intellectual responsibility to sound argument decision making that would benefit disabled people. The 1EC geography argument is an impact turn to their understanding of framework. The construction of a new form of sovereign entity is one that is something that we are comfortable in this room doing because we are not the ones in the foxeye getting blown up by drones. There's no risk of your accessibility offense because creative lawyering as a prerequisite to solving in Parker until the participation involved in public policy can have an emancipatory effect as smart social groups able to their part is not something because more aware of their civic rights, disability, which also says that engagement is a vital strategy for people with disabilities, involving race, content, increasing engagement with people with disabilities, not sure new policies and continuing cycles of political marginalization use of OC has been successful in changing policy in order to create rights or change forming laws between people with disabilities and favors included because it helps citizens gain power in the public arena. The use is another vital strategy that empowers people with disabilities to connect with the government. Counter-interpretation, the government is the USFG, the 1EC is a robust defense of that. There's Zanati evidence and against using the government as a heuristic rather than a descriptor or something that reorients the way we understand political subjectivities. It uses the space of indeterminacy, the assemblage of the law to break it down, permutation, do both, permutation, do the alternative, and permutation, do their framework argument, which solves the vast majority of their offense. Now the counterplan page, the role of the ballot is to determine the normative desirability of the 1AC. Before voting negative, they have to win that our strategy of creative lowering should be excluded, not that other strategies shouldn't be, including epistemic perfection is impossible and absent clash that for the productive potential of debate seizes. There's a solvency deficit because they don't access the method of the 1AC. It's not merely you are reading the text, but it's a process of engaging in the law, which is something that they do not do. The permutation do the counterplan, permutation do the plan in the world in which disabled persons say yes, permutation do both, permutation do the counterplan, and then the plan D. Permutations all solve better because they include both the legalistic perspective of the plan and result in a multifaceted strategy, which our evidence says is necessary. The solvency deficit is the devil is in the details. The 1AC's interrogation of legal nuances, key Donahue and 3-chain growing focus, the national security laws, benefits to student orgs. These are such two traditional models reflecting dominant divisions, laws, deeply divided political nature across unique national security law, influence of the upper engagement of these folks, being a decision of the time they have significant relation, they shape legal postures, must not teach how to think what the law must convey, what the law actually is, so that students have some groundwork. Lawyers must understand that the political process in order to be more effective, the role of law plays must be just one of many explains the decision-making strategy, part of this learning how to communicate with those involved in policy-making and implementing policy laws. Only one consideration is must insert legal consideration into what is a policy debate. Not only must students learn about legal authorities and processes, they must learn how to adapt to deal with new bureaucratic structures. These also have to go need to respond to changing institutional arrangements. One of the most important skills for students to be able to deal with factual case recommendation must be continued to really transform the volume of implementing this in the myro new standards. Technology requires new skills. How students inspire to one that acts on the he is learning to accommodate front to generate the best analysis possible, problem solving, suggest creativity, and expertise, skills that critical thinking, embrace the necessary system of laws to move the legal system forward, the able to recognize from the test conclusion, analyze pertinent for defense and critical thinking of lawyers and system knowledge of all facts and then where they run everybody's every question become dysfunctional. The delay steps would cause the policy maker to voidly review the press part and external check and pressure and internalize it is avoiding the students to prepare for these type of communication as an ends and an resultant of the encouragement of rights, rules, and traditionally teach students to continue the learning beyond those growth may depend on peer-to-peer learning opportunities to integrate these skills. Permutation do the app and the alt, permutation do the alt, and permutation do the app, and all parts of the alt that don't reject legal strategy. It solves the argument by allowing tension to be projectively reappropriated. Jenkins and tough disabilities of Scott West without the economy of concrete taste, logical limitation, and and individuals, some disability effects have called for the needed common ground rather than view the medical and social models. Competitors hold advocates the creation of the theoretical space and view these models in standard relation remaining the tension that exists between the two models that enable disability to give itself account from both material reality and term while seeking to change our social environment. The segment has an exclude all individuals. Their focus on satire, as per their evidence from 2010, causes an endless cycle of discussion that does not channel debate into restrictions. Compretis and 2K Arnie divides the flow of temporal into there's really mystification of feature that remains terrorized by a relapse into the unauthentic visits when they can never overcome it, only remains and repeat and not increasing the special remains caught in the impossibility of making the knowledge after was the empirical one on mass critique fit is repeat the necessity and task without and with and without progress. Now the embodiment page, embracing embodiment politics on the context of disabilities, crops societal backlash and reifies the ability disability binary : 2K. We group them together as symbolic of something else with the non-disabled people with disability, symbolize imperfection of vulnerability that anyone can be and anytime makes it more threatening those who identify themselves into this strain this there to enforce a clean demarcation or deny the uncontrolled spectrum of physical and mental attributes. This restraint adherence to medical, legal, or other models that provides a bridge and normative line between ability and disability. Identity politics resemble the ability disability binders along different lines. Identity politics requires acknowledgement that there is a clear demarcation. Identity politics fails to produce liberation. Our argument isn't just that drones kill people via warfare; they also inflict suffering. As per the highlighting of our 1EC evidence that says there's an endless juridical gauge that cause unending biopower. The 1EC Hughes evidence indicates that bearing witness to this in this particular debate space is something that breaks that from a violent sound and that only a rhetorical strategy is capable of doing this. That's the Engels and Sass evidence. It also causes the conflict that is broader. Greenhouse on 13 Nabila's and she was playing outside her home when missiles were coming to field and tried to warn a better party. 2 Billy Warner brother was taken for surgery, moved shrapnel her. Sister had problems hearing more, and suffered more from 6 and the Barbara Fake was training from evening prayers in Nabila and trying to Pakistan to Washington. Affective approaches fail to mobilize political change. Practice can contributors so the learning to have value of Pakistan pertains to the question of how to put these insights when humanity has proven thorny these works from inside because even though they may say seem particularly active phenomena, the importance of the work is lost here. One could emphasize the importance of acting as critique or critique itself. Give your seeing the much returns on such cause they multiple be again to find a way to describing effective strategies for mobilizing or how we might use the affective dimensions of politics to leverage for political purposes. Our argument isn't solely one that focuses on the images of warfare, but it recognizes that violence is all interconnected and that each different strategy requires different modes of attack, which means that the 1EC's different approach to the law is valuable. The Machalko evidence just says that things are malleable. It's a question of how we appropriate what we learn in this debate to that ability. Permutation do the plan and make the permutation do both. Now disability identity politics replicates the practices of ableism through the exclusion of those who don't fit. That's Samuels 3. People with non-invisible disabilities presenting category Christian disabilities, subcultures, assumption of correlation, experience, and identity have resulted in exclusive focus on disabilities, the basic change coming out as valorous subculture and dynamics of exclusion and surveillance over members of the impulse or privileges also can replicate down and attitude with use of disabilities of social categories. Members do not bear difference or run invisible, marginalized people with non-invisible are marginalized and disability communities facing discrimination because identities are disbelieved. Many with non-visible disabilities face a daily struggle for accommodation and even positive disemployment reifies the us-them binary, causes societal scapegoating that Scott Hill to a focus on the body appears with activity because accounts of corporate unsophisticated and over-simple interpretation. This manner of invisible is not essentially as a disability attendee members of population not for the same or run invisible and marginalized the same way disability apply for that cultural identity. We're gonna scratch that.
Scratch that. So the last card now that I need to answer is Samuel's.
Yep.
Okay.
Ready?
The only permutation on embodiment was do both.
Yep.
Ready?
Perfect.
I'll start with one of the last piece of evidence. You said affect does not do anything. 1AC, you concede fiat is
That wasn't
real.
our claim. Our claim was not that affect doesn't do anything, that it's not a productive means of scholarship or engaging the political.
Sure. 1AC, you say fiat's not real, then what is the point of giving that speech? What do you do? What is
We think
affect
our
in
discussion
1AC?
is educationally valuable and forwarding a
Do you not
scholarship
think
and a
the
pedagogy.
discussion-
Another important part of it
breaking
is
into
to
institutions.
win. We have a defense of competition and normative statements in that
Okay.
you have to contest.
Okay, you say there's no risk, or you read an Owen and Reuter evidence on your framework flow, same card we read, by the way, which indicates that including disabled people into these deliberations is key. What part of your 1AC or what part of your interpretation of framework includes disabled
No. This
people?
card says that a major source of struggle for disability results from structures, and that focusing and learning on how to break down those structural and institutional forces is important for combating disability.
Sure.
So clearly voices are important. The question is how we incorporate
It's
them.
based on structures, right? And you're defending the U.S. federal government structure. We have a dissent to that says that is not a productive way of including disabled people. What is your answer to?
We've linked her in the way you've come to understand what the USFG does and how it operates.
Sure.
And given the inevitability of that structure, we need to work within it.
Okay, your last work within it, so that leads me to the counterplan flow where we are working within it.
You are in no way working within it.
Okay.
Excuse me, we said the United States Congress should do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you haven't engaged in the nitty-gritty of the legal details, which are very, very important for the discussion of how legal
your
processes
argument is
work.
we didn't reread the 1AC.
No.
You didn't read
a counterplan, a dissent, you didn't
That
engage in
was
the debate
a-
of process over the power of the purse.
No, this is very important to clarify. We had a counterplan that replaced only one word. We agree with everything else in the 1AC except for that word. The only answer you seem to have made that's responsive is irony bad.
Also, yeah.
Totally
what part
disagree
of
with that
the party?
characterization. The counterplan does not solve because
Why?
then we're impact turning the idea of the net benefit and the means by which you generate
If
offense.
your claim is that the result is indistinguishable, then it's not competitive. If
Right,
your
well,
claim is that it's tangibly
are
different,
these
then we
arguments in
impact
the
turn the
2AC
idea
made?
that our
Certainly
outcomes
there.
are-
Oh, okay. That
Okay, so
We made an argument about the role of the ballot and the voter
Sure.
rejoinder, which the
Let's-
counterplan
Sure, you
clearly
also
doesn't
make an
solve.
argument that
ourselves. This is
irony is
worth
bad.
it.
What part of the counterplan do you think was ironic?
What part was ironic? You read a card that defends the concept of satire, and we have read Ev that says that
Just
that is
because
a
the
bad means of approaching
evidence
politics.
mentioned satire, that means the whole counterplan
I mean,
satire?
that Ev says satire is a good way to
Okay.
approach
You
politics
also
as the
read-
net benefit to the
Sure.
counterplan.
You also read this this part about interrogation being key. How does the counterplan preclude interrogation of?
I'm sorry. Which form of interrogation are you referencing? Because the one I
Which
see is
form is your
online.
card? The card on this counterplan.
Are you
flow.
referencing the piece of Donahue evidence?
I guess if that's on the counterplan. flow.
The Donahue evidence just explains what is required for comprehensive legal analysis.
Okay, what is required?
A discussion of authorities, a discussion of statutes. The list sort of goes on.
And I got this? Yeah. The ones I'm done with, hopefully by this one.
Brought in some ringers for this weekend. Y'all brought in some ringers for this weekend. Aiden first. Greg Friends. No, sure.
Just a quick clarification question.
Of
Which
course.
of your cards about liberalism or legal reformism are about disability?
I believe it was that one card right on the second off-case position.
Okay, so if the judges asked for any cards after
No,
the
we're gonna
name-
give them the other ones because we're gonna say the other cards pertain to it.
Sure, but explicitly mention disability.
The two cards that are under the second off-case header, I think, are the most on point, but we do think the other cards.
Sure, obviously you think that the rest will apply, but the ones that explicitly mention disability are those two.
Yes, and then there's the embodiment cards, which
Sure,
are also relevant
yeah,
for.
obviously all of the stuff on the embodiment K is about that. Did you counter define any words?
I defined the USFG just as, like the federal government in DC, and
Where is that?
there wasn't a card for that. Just said that that's what it was.
Okay. Where did you say that?
I made that argument on the framework page. I'm pretty sure I made that argument.
You said the USFG is a heuristic. I guess that's what you thought you meant. Okay.
No, I'm pretty sure I said like the USFG is the government, and then engaging with the law is good. So yeah.
Okay. If affect doesn't matter, how do you create empathy?
Yeah, the crossings is over. Like if it's a clarification question, we'll answer, but we're not gonna.
Okay. Sorry, just keep in mind that that is now our stated policy on that.
That's fine. What's the other one I see? That's crosswalk passes.
Caveats?
Oh yeah.
Okay, I'm good.
Do you still need this package, or?
I would like to
what
keep
time
it
you
if you
got?
don't need it.
No, we would like it
Okay.
since you won't answer questions during cross-ex.
Yeah, those
I
are
think we had about
Or
5:30.
5:30 used? So I got 4:30 left? Okay.
The order will be a collection of poems. The topicality funding is not authority argument. Cripple stand framework. And then the embodiment criticism. I'll take, you're probably won't answer this, but I'll take a second to prep. Were there any theory arguments?
Just like
There was like the burden of rejoinder clash argument, but there wasn't a theory argument external to that.
Sorry, can you just do that again from the top? I missed the first one.
It's going to be the collection of poems,
Yes.
the topicality defunding,
Yes, I've got it.
and then cripple stand framework and the embodiment criticism. Ready? These were not just random FYIs, they were arguments. The argument by our autobiography evidence is that standpoint epistemology is vital to understanding disability, which is a distinction that almost none of their evidence will answer. They shouldn't get new answers to this argument because they have simply ignored the poetry because it didn't fit the form and content of what they deem acceptable. The poet of Cripple's argument is about the non-uniqueness to all of their offense on the embodiment flow. It says that these are imposed upon us. We come into the world with binaries. The invisible and mental disability, or the visible versus invisible already exists. I am already coded into all of these spaces. No new answers to these arguments. Identity politics is inevitable. We don't have a choice. Our poetry is a necessary interruption and competes. This is Ferris in 2011. I'm sorry, this space is reserved for poems with disabilities. I know it's one of the best spaces in the book, but the Poems with Disabilities Act requires us to make all reasonable accommodations for poems that aren't normal. This is a nice space just a few pages over. In fact, don't tell anyone. I think it's better than this one. I prefer it myself. Actually, I don't see any of those poems right now, but you never know when one of them might show up. So we have to keep this space open. You can't always tell just from looking at them either. Sometimes they'll look just like a regular poem when they roll in and you're reading along. Suddenly everything changes. The world tilts a little Anglovich and your entails where you left them. You remember your aunt died of cancer, just your age. Maybe that yesterday's twinge means something after all. Your sloppy, fragile heart beats a little faster, and then you just know the poem is right where it belongs. Crip poetry is a necessary interruption to the heuristic of the 1AC. They have no defense of the form of the 1AC. They only have a defense of the content of the 1AC. This is Ferris in 11. Symmetry is a fundamental principle of human endeavor. We see it, we seek it all around us in nature, in our bodies, but also in the things we humans make in art. Symmetry is something that resonates us. But what does it mean to have different starting point, a different foundation, a different center, or no center? What would it mean to live in a world that understood the 8 symmetries as prime characteristics of the world sensitized by cripacetic, finding ways to do things differently by the hallmark of living with disability, hallmark of disability culture. Bodies are not absolute as an art, disabled person, one who believes possibly a social or personal change or resistance to make our bodies determined to keep disabled people in place and force bodies to be determined. Our bodies limits to be sure we can accomplish those limits. Must not be contributed to the limits of thinking non-disabled people, even disabled people around us, save few disabled people, including poets, musicians, other artists, context, and disabilities can be affirming, empowering, and generative. The rugged individuals who hope hard to sustain a contemporary life, hard to self to save from the disabled culture, values, and independence over the illusion of independence. Privilege is not a uniform perspective, but validity of a wide range of views moving through the world of varied perspectives, directed to an agenda. When I first wrote about crip poetry, I was seeking not only to start things and was seeing them swallowing poets. I also wanted to be particular flowering poetry, not make a big deal of the difference called disability, but not taken for granted either. This was based on what's beginning to understand as crip poetics and poetics of all rights, a wide range of beings and responding to the world and claim space for alternative, non-normative experience, language, thoughts, and feeling over there. Yeah, hardly. But what is the future for crip poetry? I'm not sure what the present is, let alone the future. The idea of crip poetry writes a description, way to think about what's going to do to an invitation, community building, usable. Past is a constructive future when poets look at past and present, even engage conversation, telling us anything. I still think poetry can change the world, though those changes may be some possibly small, a phrase here, a feeling there. The idea might eventually my fertile grown to be subtle. I've got some changes I'd like to see in the future for crip poetry, which means the alternative heuristic is a much better way to solve the affirmative. We create empathy by interrupting the meter and cadence as an implicit criticism of the way they have read the 1ACTU. It sounds boring for a reason. Our evidence indicts that often says that poetry is necessary. They should use law as a solution. Okay, counterperm. Use the law and poetry. This is not it is not competitive. They don't have crip poetry. It's not just poetry about disability. In the exclusion arguments, all of their state arguments will be answered on the framework of the topicality at the top. We need LOL. You're underlining. This is some MSU style stuff. Your evidence literally goes on to say that that is not authority. Their counterinterpretation says limits, not restrictions, which means R1 and T definition is much more precise on this point, which should be the standard for this argument. They say that the process is key in their Fisher evidence. They have conceded our ground argument that all of the links on this topic are to authority, not the mechanism. I'm sorry that it is a bad topic and you always lose the circumvention. Right about or affirmative, that's not a reason that justifies this. They say no ground loss argument because we have other links. That's like saying that is not a very good response. Our links are to authority because we research the topic. We are the middle ground. Their alternative is a polarization DA. We will never talk about the topic. The identity geography arguments. What about the people who are not in this space? They only want to talk about the out there because it's uncomfortable for them the way they perpetuate the people that aren't here, which is that they've conceded our reasonability argument that small schools like Houston that have one coach versus the 30 dude box of Michigan should get the benefit of the doubt on this, which means that their prep is always infinitely their evidence about consciousness is a double bind with their affect arguments. If affect doesn't do anything, then the affirmative does nothing. It's just just a normative statement that never leaves this room because no one learns anything from it, woo, you are not going to be able to win any reason why talking about the affirmative was important. They have also conceded that their Fisher evidence says that the president could seek other funds. It would be really bad for him to do that, but he would. No piece of evidence says that he wouldn't circumvent it. Framework. Case outweighs it's about the wrong federal government. They have no counter-interpretation or counter-definition. Cripple stand is where we are. It is where we are going, which means that federal government should have been the plan text. They are not topical and do not meet. They've also conceded the CCOM evidence, the normative statement of the plan. We impact her in that argument. There's no such thing as a universalist mode of communication, which means every time they say normative statement, you should ask for who and whether or not that is commensurate to other people, which is what it flattens out in the racist difference. I do not think they're going to win Framework just because of that distinction alone. No answer to the good cripple, bad cripple distinction, which will probably be important in the 1AR. The people that cause a ruckus, the people that point out that we are not citizens in this place, but we are citizens of another place, are what is necessary to solve access, which is where most of the access to be will be elsewhere. The Framework argument, you can't roleplay disability consciousness load in Pollard 10 when viewed through the lens of compliance focus is what must be done, rather what can be done. Legal focus does not appear to full participation, stable person, post-secondary education integration is not a thing be delivered by policymakers or educators, but a process of struggle that has to be joined. Please join us. LOL at the idea of policymakers get us for Ruby 2005. Politicians and pundits never stop to consider one quarter American city might be made up of people cannot for physical development to reason pick up and leave when they're told. That's what I mean when I say disability was invisible. Such a will look at an individual person with disabilities reject this object of charity, poor, pity, but disability is a category of human dignity. His word is social political life. Disabilities with public action policy means inconceivable. Think about it this way. At no point in our national debate didn't even turn to the question of how by policy will affect people with disabilities. Our framework can spill over, but there's McGill, no date from the outside disabled because more records the problem disabled was a societal one that encompasses all aspects of physical and cultural environment. This obvious implication of all academics and all politicians, policymakers we see incapable of urging meaningful changes. Academics and researchers can by adopting and adapting a disability studies perspective into their area of expertise. In this way, can we help address the various environmental cultural barriers? Is one way to desire all of us. If their framework arguments are true, cripples need them. We will agree with the thesis of almost all of their arguments except for access. That is prior question. If we get more cripples in here to get all this good education about legalism, that would be even better, which is an internal link to all of their offense. They should not get to permute our framework argument when they do not have a counter-interpretation, which means what are they combining with it? The heuristic, but when they see is incompatible with it, they don't have a counter-definition to support it anyway. The permutation to the alternative, okay, then you lose. You don't meet our framework argument. I actually will concede that argument. You shouldn't be allowed to kick out of it. Now I'm on the kick. There was zero answer to the floating pick. The Boys and Breckenridge evidence says that there is no distinction between form and content, which means you can agree with the substance of the 1AC and think that we win any of our link arguments the way it was delivered, the way it was made intelligible to you. Any of our content or our form links above, which was all of the poetry, heuristic arguments, they have conceded that the alternative, there's no argument in the 2AC that the alternative does not solve. Rejecting normalcy as a metric is a way to allow us to create empathy for all people that are oppressed by systems of oppression. Normalcy becomes a template by which we can explain all of these things. Look, no new one in our arguments about why we don't solve empathy. That is a conceded argument. Our Berube evidence says that disability must be foundational to our understanding of egalitarian social justice, which means if you care about people that are being drone struck and you want to create empathy towards them, we must start with disability because that sets the terms for who is entitled, which means the definition of human is a prerequisite to these arguments. Their first argument is about the social model. This is not unique by our Motoko evidence. This is also the poop homes that they conceded. Take both of these arguments. This is inevitable. It's given to us in the status quo. The idea that we are all disabled is a link. This is McGrew 2006. And Hable Society doesn't have to take us seriously. Disabled like can be confused, universalized. What it counters call us really nothing new really about it. All of us question why are we all queer disabled community are saying you don't need to be taken seriously, do you? In fact, all not all queer disabled. Able body binaries produce real material distinctions set up in all. Universalization with a disability crypt theory advocates for a contingent universalization of disability and symbols. But when we're leading asking the question, can this be made clearer? Your argument here is inconsistent. Are you being contradicted when asked this question? How to dismantle the current concept of corporeality? Would I let all these norms work in the text and discourse program need to crypt? How can this system be D? Can pose your next argument is about suffering of the biopolitics of using wetness. Yes, this description of suffering is the exact link to our argument. They have conceded the McSorley evidence that these type of abstract depictions, what are the names of the people you are talking about? That is what creates emotional distancing in the first place. They focus on the wrong ontology of violence. They focus on up here, what America is doing in here, not on the particulars of it, which is an internal link to our McSorley evidence says that makes conflict and violence inevitable. They've also conceded that presenting only victims, not survivors, not people that made it out, not veterans, not the people that are firing the drones is also a link to our argument because it disembodies and creates an overarching narrative of war that is necessarily ableist and answers their victim argument. Their affect fails argument is not very well answered, and our 1AC evidence is simply much better on this. I'm going to have Dan Weir in a card that is key to deliberative democracy, but it also takes out 100% of the affirmative because the affirmative is about empathy. That's a feeling uncomfortable. The next argument that they was that they were not a sole focus on war. Tacking it on in the 2AC is worse. The permutation answers that Dan Weir is about to read prove that that is accommodation, not access. The permutation, the disability, invisible stuff.
Yeah, I was running out of time. The rest of it will be in one and R.
1 second.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's take a little bit of prep. I think it's in that one. NDT.
I get that, yeah.
Okay. We're good.
Okay. You said you've made us uncomfortable. How do you know we're uncomfortable? I'm
Excuse
pretty
me?
happy to be here.
Wait,
you
when did
made
I
the
say?
argument about us being uncomfortable and that being a good
When?
thing. Like in the middle of the 2 and C, you're saying you didn't make an argument about comfort, no comfort argument in the 2 and C?
Our argument, I don't know which specific argument you're referencing. When did I say that in what context?
Don't worry about it. The McGill evidence says your framework spills over and ours doesn't. What is the difference? Why?
Disability studies as educators, instead of pretending to be policymakers and lawyers, actually creates meaningful change for the people in this room. It makes us better advocates. We are internally.
Why
telling
can't
the
we
framework-
be better
Look,
advocates
here,
for
this is
legal
very-
change in
sorry,
the
sorry,
same
sorry.
way,
This
though?
is very important to clear up. We agree with large parts of your framework. Our argument was that civil society is dead now for disabled people, and the solution to that is to increase participation by disabled people, not to do the thing that you are doing,
I
which
guess
is
my
just
question is, what is the difference in terms of the material spillover for this debate? What does the ballot meaningfully change?
Our argument is that disability consciousness is a prerequisite to many of the things you have said.
Okay.
It is true that the law might be redeemable. The only way it is, though, is the inclusion of disability.
You've made an argument that you are already coded as disabled. What
Yes.
constitutes being coded as disabled?
Other people ask me what happened. Other people call me a cripple. Other people tell me that I am ugly. Other people tell me that my hand freaks them out.
What
Other people,
about
the
you?
photographer,
What-
5 minutes, no, 5 minutes before this debate, a photographer for the New Republic wanted to take a picture of me, asked me to put my hands in my pocket. That is what it means to be coded as disabled. Has anyone
What
done that
about
shit
someone
to
who
you?
has invisible disability, Crohn's
that
disease,
same dude
Ellen
from the TNR was like, hey bro, how about you put away your insulin pump? So I don't appreciate the pretensions of that question.
I was talking to Pappas, not you, and that he
Well,
asked me.
clearly we're a team and we're debating
Can you-
together. That's relevant.
Guys, pause. He asked me if I had been coded as disabled, and I was responding with a specific example. I was not accusing you of not.
Yeah,
also being
I
coded
wasn't.
that way.
I guess I misspecified the question. What constitutes being coded as disabled? And I guess the question is like invisible disability.
Yeah, so I never will attempt to speak for any disabled person's experience except for my own, which
Okay.
is the thesis of our tell a story alternative to create empathy with
Totally
particularities.
understand. I'm sorry for generating unnecessary hostility. You've made an argument for what is human. What is human?
Well, I don't think the 2AC answered over Ruby evidence. You actually had a copy of it in the 2AC doc and then didn't read it. Our argument is that debates about participatory parity, i.e. who gets to show up and debate, who should be allowed to show up and debate, who should be made accessible to debate, set the terms for debates about the variety of human life, i.e. eugenics, and other things.
I guess my question was more so for a concrete definition of the term, because you said defining that as a prerequisite to some form of engagement.
Our argument is that democratizing the franchise of who can contest these things in the first place is necessary to come to that conclusion. I don't think
How does the
Barubi-
neg democratize it?
Our Barubi evidence says that access is a prerequisite. I also don't think that the 2AC very well answered these access arguments, that this is a framing question. We agree with much of your framework, but cripples need it. They're actually the people that need it the most, which is why we should make debate accessible. We think disability consciousness leads to that, then leads to your framework.
It'll be the K and then the counterpoint.
Is that the bottom of the flow?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you for saying dropped.
Where is...
It's a person that gets told I drop things every day of my life. Actually, we're going to take another second to prep. We're going to read this. Wait,
I just need the first page of it. I won't have time to read it.
is it in the other one? I'll find it for you during your speech.
Sounds good.
How much was she used? Start a timer, do we want to
Well,
call
call
it?
Okay.
Alright, 410 by.
Is everyone ready?
I'm not. Hold on for a second.
Huh?
I'm not. Hold
Okay,
on.
let me know.
I also know.
Yeah, yeah.
That did not sound good.
The body is always already a prior question. Voting negative destabilizes the disembodied understanding of debate. Clifford 12, rather than simply a verbal exchange, deliberative democracy is also a body-impacted deliberative interaction carried out in the present body. Despite this fact, deliberative democratic theories fail to attend to the ways bodies communicate and consequently are unable to grapple with inequalities caused by the bodily difference when the body is embodiment. This closed usually signifies a marked corporal reality marginalized due to causing them to be treated with aversion, while the more privileged remain disembodied. Nothing. This ordinance, the disability right movement, aims to destabilize the meaning of all bodies by living non-disabled people. TAB, temporarily able bodies, is situating all human as embodiment, vulnerable and unstable. Revised deliberative democratic theory should similarly recognize all participants as embodied, troubling the myth of disembodiment. Also discerns the false dichotomy between unruly body and transparent speech. Disembodiment from which the illusory believe that language is always clear and coherent. Also, at the end of the speech, when he indicates that Eric dropped something, are you serious? Very insensitive, very offensive to say a person that only has one hand always hears is not linguistic ableism as a voting issue. Hoya 14 comment is the accusation as a list of tools of policing language. So what's the purpose? Because linguistic ableism is part of a total system of ableism. It is also and it's critical to understand how it works, how it's deployed, and how we can unlearn our social conditioning. As important as it is to recognize and uncover the violence of linguistic ableism, is also critical to understand why this is important. Linguistic ableism, part of an entire system of ableism, signifies how deeply our societies and reinforces ableist social norms that normalize violence, actively creates safe spaces, and uses ableism to perpetuate other forms of oppression. This isn't about policing, but about examining how language is part of ableist hegemony. This is about being accountable. Now, the permutation, there's no way that they can perm Eric's story. Also, there is an important distinction between accommodation and accessibility. The permutation is always already accommodation because it's reactive. The permutation still places responsibility to raise conscience and ask for our own inclusion on a disabled body, which makes institutional cause of exclusion and precludes meaningful access to debate fit Kruger 10. Because we typically, without thinking, frame disability as an individual problem would be reactive rather than proactive. In other words, we accommodate disability, maintain the notion that access is disabled individuals' problem to solve on most college campuses. Disabled people spend an inordinate amount of time establishing eligibility, requesting accommodation, rationale, and self-advocacy. While it's important for all students to identify issues, solve problems, and make decisions, why should the disabled student be required to retake responsibility for the access issues that are institutional problems? Why should the academic experience for a disabled student be so different than the non-disabled peers?
That's good. And any link proves they don't opt out of ableism.
And also, any link proves that they don't opt out of ableism. Their speech proves it. Now go to the counterplan flow. This counterplan is you pick. I don't understand what any of their solvency method. There's the only solvency deficit argument they make is a method argument. We meet their method because we engage in that method. Our counterplan only picks out of a word that we don't think they should be using, and the benefit is that the counterplan does it better because our Ruby evidence indicates that they fail to include disabled people into the space of deliberative democracy. Only the counterplan does that. Crippling is key. This is key to access solvency for the rest of the counterplan because the counterplan cripples we access solvency for the rest of the plan and solve all of their advantages because we cripple funding, which creates the discussion and creates the deliberation that they are trying to achieve because it does exactly the same thing that the plan is doing now. They say the Donahue evidence. We engage in all of the same nuances, but we do it better because we include crippled bodies, we include disabled bodies into the discussion. This also their card creates mutual exclusivity for us because it creates a differentiation between their method and our method, which proves that their method is solely focused on the able body and does not include disabled people. This is probably an answer to the permutation. Also, a deliberation of able bodies now impacted this as our SECOM evidence features when they privilege rational discourse and privilege legal discourse. This always excludes the disabled body. Also, disabled bodies they can't solve the net benefit to the counterplan or solve any of the plan, but we still can solve the plan. This is Harris. 2012 for people with disabilities continue to be marginalized in all aspects of the policy making process. People with disabilities do not believe that they can impact on the political system. Elected officials really solicit the input of people with disabilities, and it's important that people with disabilities are able to engage in public policy debate. Nothing about us without us is hurting disability right movement. The call for people with disabilities to be involved in the decision making about them, increasing engagement of people with disabilities to ensure that new policies do not continue to cycle political marginalization historically experienced by the population. That means you cannot engage in legalism without first doing the counterplan or the critique. Now they make the permutation, do the counterplan, or do all the argument. There's no justification for solving severance as a moving target and enforce infinitely aggressive as a voting issue. Now also their evidence established competition.
Proves our T.
Right, proves our T argument. Also, it's that their evidence established competition for us. That means they sever out of their method. Now they say permutation do both first. Links to the net benefit. You can cross-apply the answer from the K flow is their accommodation, not access. Also, second there. Again, cross-apply their own method argument. Also, third extent over Smith evidence. The permutation.
That's the footnoting argument.
Right, it's the footnoting argument. Also, that they just tack on disability to their method. Also, you can extend over third is the extent over Smith evidence, which indicates that they kind of come with their permutation conforms our method into their method, trying to enforce us to be a good cripple and not allow us to be the back cripple that rocks the boat that is necessary necessary to be able to access solvency. It reinforces the time frame permutation as a voting issue. Excuse 1 and 2 strategy. Also, second is that it links to Crip Time Campbell 13, able to find upon a utopian hermeneutics of desirable and disgusting, and therefore it is necessary to include alternative political imaginaries. Western perspective can incorporate disability is also outside Western culture would be charged emergence of vital from the danger that only period of adolescence, the desire, process, and maturation. We create longevity and most desirable feature pathologies, modes of living that show little or no concept of longevity within the Western subject. Long periods of stability considered to be desirable when people live in are characterized as immature. Crip time can be frenzied, code, and be distance between the two. And when crip time involves getting there or time, running out of time, or it is never a good time of the exhaustion. Dealing with ableist relations that are behind the time now. Their tensions argument first. This is not offense to the counterplan. Second, the counterplan solves that because the tension is what we are criticizing. We want to create tension so that people can come to the terms of their ableist violence. Also, third, all of the permutation answers above. Answer this is not the irony argument. LOL. This is offensive. This is not. Nowhere in the counterplan was irony ever included. Their assumption that we are being ironic is the link to our argument. We think Congress, exactly. We think Congress should grapple with what cripple means. This proves the link to their method that they can never be included in our method because they'll always think the good cripple being ironic or the good.
There is no solvency
or bad
deficit
being ironic. No solvency deficit.
Who are we counting down from?
7 minutes and I guess 7:20.
Cool, thank you. Talk to me about that in a minute. I gotta organize a couple things. Can you find the sequel code? Can you find it?
It's highlighted in yellow.
Appreciate
That helps on white paper.
Okay. It might be in this other stack. I just didn't find it. In fact, it's probably in that stack.
Thanks, Lenny.
You're welcome.
So that first. Do you have any real particularities, Travis, about like what the order is for that? Like what do you want me to go to first? Okay, that's good. Yeah.
Yep, good to go. We've got 320 left.
Actually, can you give me a moment? Sorry, I'm just trying to do. I need to do one thing with my computer.
Sorry, could you say that again, Nooch?
Wait.
Yeah, I've got to attach the doc anyway, so it'll take a sec.
Oh, of course.
Unless you need it for the one.
No, I don't think so. Unless Alice needs it. You need it?
Dude, what? No, I'm done with the stack.
Thank you.
I sort of miss it, to be honest.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, stats.
Sorry, just one moment.
So the order is topicality, collection of poems, pick out of the USFG, embodiment, and framework.
When you say pick out of USFG, do you mean pick out of?
Or sorry, purpose. And framework on the bottom.
That's the part we definitely have.
Can you run that by me one more time?
Yep. So topicality,
Oh.
collection of poems, purple counterplan, the embodiment critique, and then framework on the bottom. Cool. Can't go for topicality when you drop the we need argument. Our Allen evidence defines the plan in the context of what we do as a restriction. That means we have contextual evidence in the context of the topic, which is a big topic, education, DH, all other arguments, because, and also not predictability one, because obviously when we look for solvency advocates, if they define themselves as a restriction on authority, and then they introduce an arbitrary definition, it creates a race to the bottom that breaks away the core half innovation background, which is important. They don't break all the links to the authority arguments. Our evidence defines restriction as a limitation, and we have read evidence that we do that, i.e. Obama no longer has authority in the world of the plan because he has been explicitly revoked as funding, which is equally equivalent to any sort of oversight mechanism, which are all in some form declarations. Don't air towards Houston. They don't win because they're nicer, cooler people than us. They can only win by debating better our angles. Evidence says that we're more than just an FYI. It's a form of problematizing the role of the debaters in civil society, and gives the example of the TV example from our Hedges evidence, and says that the worst thing that we can do is a form of apathy by indicating that when we say the USFG should do things, we just give up on it. That's the exact attitude that accepts war is inevitable. It means that we only obsess with wordplay instead of actually changing things, which is all a net benefit to our affirmative. The Fisher evidence, they really don't have the backup for this. They all assume that it's in the plantics, which it isn't. We create an explicit declaration of illegality, and our Cole evidence is that's sufficient to deter actions by the executive, so there's no circumvention argument. Now the collection of poems at the top, the standpoint epistemology argument, we answer this, but we will make new arguments because the explanation shifted substantially in the 2NC. If you disagree with that, then you should have been able to predict every argument in the 2NC after the 1NC. The coding already exists, but it's a question of how you confront it. Our half is a net benefit to this, because our claim is that not that an exclusive focus on legal solutions is key, but rather that it needs to be part of it. All of their arguments ultimately amount to we need to problematize what the law is. Be that as made, there also has to be a form of normative engagement with the law. That's the point of all of our agonism evidence. It's not that is the final ending point, but rather that writing that out leads to an endless focus on alterity without actually engaging the material forces that create those things. They are constructing a straw person, which ironically links to the false objectivity, because the more that they describe us as that, the more that they are debating something that doesn't exist. They don't win because of reading a poem. They don't own their speech act. They don't have monopoly on language, or they lose because we're the only ones reading testimony from the drone victims. That's our greenhouse evidence talking about Nabila, who is a drone survivor. Our other evidence just proves that form and content are co-constitutive. The 1AC was poetic. That's the whole point. We did perform our pedagogy. That is why we read the Donahue card, but assuming we didn't, we'll lose in the debate. Learner 12. If I recognize spread and dark warnings of financial doublespeak, I've also recognized in poetry the push the skin for the contingency of our words. When I participate in fast debate or discover 12 by composition energies, I did not possess prior hours making contact with the gender of transpersonal powerful language when I was in my Dillard suit spewing arguments in a largely empty school when I was an ignorant undergrad spewing my Midwestern romanticism. I was in all my preposterous responding to a real crisis, the national separation of value and policy. It's a diss to the alternative. Learner 12. I'm noting the symmetry between the debate and what passes for national political discourse. The parallel is imperfect, but the supposedly disinterested policy walks debate the healthcare, financial regulation, and a jargon inaccessible, while the more presidential speakers test out value claims. One of the criticisms I've heard of the spread was that it detached policy debate from the old and that nobody used language the way policy debaters did, except maybe auctioneers or rappers. Those are significant exceptions, but I'd also know that corporate persons use the spread all the time, thinking of warnings for prescription drugs or when risk info is discovered the fine print from the insurance company. These are just not to conceal the exposed info that will be treated like a dropped argument. It's no excuse that you didn't have that time. Americans are always getting spread in their daily lives. Meanwhile, politicians speak very, very slowly about values utterly disconnected from policies. Now, affect, we have in fact turned to the notion that a focus on affect is sufficient. I think the 2AC card was pretty good on that, and also proved the argument that the counter permutation is the app. That was the learner card I read above. Now the triple counter plan, they are either a pickup out of something that doesn't include the mechanism of the plan, or their argument just becomes a wordplay one, which we have in fact turned to create a form of fatalism that the USFG should never impose, so we need to reject the critical vocabulary altogether. That is what most of their evidence is trying to establish, and if they reframe it to the contrary, then it proves that they don't compete with that. They do the same thing without wordplay. They don't have evidence that the USFG doesn't do that, just that cripple does do that thing, which means that we can problematize the USFG, which is critical because that is the language in the US federal code, so even if they insert the word cripple, that doesn't mean anything unless they connect it to the tangible result, which only we do. Also, geography is a global impact turn to everything they're going for. All of their arguments about how cripple is something within inside us and outside there is incredibly vague and ignores that there is actually a physical difference between the violence that happens to people with disabilities in the US and people who are getting struck with hellfire missiles in other countries. Their equation of all those different forms of violence is what will lose in the debate because it ignores that yes, violence is interconnected, but it has distinct modalities that call for different forms of strategies, that only revoking funding is a way to do that. Now the last card they read is in a sequencing argument. Their Harris evidence says disability needs to be included. You have to explain to us what they do to include disability. They said at least 3 or 4 times in the block that disability needs to be included, but you're the ones spreading just like us and making arguments. The only thing is that they insist on it without providing a mechanism, which only we have done. Permutations are never a voter issue. They're just a test of competition, which means they haven't met their opportunity cost. The Jenkins argument proves that it's the only way to avoid a monopoly on meeting. The irony argument, I think they're misunderstanding it. Their 2011 evidence definitely defends comedy, which we are critiquing. The argument is that, if we just say cripple instead of restrict, then Congress will totally realize how effed up it is. It might be necessary but insufficient, which means only our incorporation strategy can do both. Now the next page, the floating pick, is an independent voter issue because it takes away 2AC alphas, makes it impossible to engage them. All of the agonism stuff is a net benefit to it. It assumes a hardline affect argument, which we're not making. We're making an insufficiency argument. That's our Puchinik and Cole evidence, which says yes, cultural focus is important, but so is institutional. With their Machaco evidence, never said that we never said we are all disabled. In fact, Vema evidence says that the distinction between disability and non-disabled is good, but a sole focus on it is bad because it means leads to stuff like forced disclosure, which is ironically bad for people with disability because it leads to stuff like higher insurance premiums for them. Our McSorley evidence is answered by Nabila. We didn't do it. Our evidence actually cites testimony from a survivor, and our Hughes evidence is about the operators themselves. Now I'm going to answer the argument at the bottom about dropping that has the obviously different meanings. For instance, you don't have to have hands to drop something. A drone, predator drone can do it. All the framework stuff was implicitly answered on the other flows. All their argument is that this means something totally different, which either doesn't solve our offense or links to it. Their Pollard evidence is a voter issue. We're not role-playing how many type 1 diabetics have won the NDT. Their Ruby evidence doesn't say that all politics is irredeemable. In fact, the language in that card that they use about how stuff like ramps and stuff are important is an example of how accessibility and accommodation isn't a hard and fast distinction, and their attempt to make it one is why the permutation is necessary. Yes.
explain a permutation on the king?
Yeah, our claim is just that like most of the perms are sort of just like global non-opportunity cost arc to like the 2NR focus.
I actually kind of feel like you're implying yeah. Clarification question, what was the answer to the counter perm?
The arc is the counter perm is a reason to vote F.
Okay. What was the reason why floating picks are bad?
Makes it impossible for us to get offense and causes late-breaking debates. It's like the movie card.
Do
you have any more of the ribbons?
I don't think so. No.
Yeah, I'll double check, but I think we gave it all back. Yeah, I don't see anything else.
Alright.
Last year was pretty good.
The order will be topicality defunding, poems, it's pausing for dramatic effect, framework, which is where I'm going to do my framing stuff, the counter plan, and the embodiment criticism.
I'm sorry, just to get that again. Topicality, collection of poems, framework, the counterplan, the embodiment criticism?
Yeah.
Cool.
Are we all good? I'm only going for our presumption arguments, our presumption argument, their legal focus fails because it leaves a loophole for Obama. They do not have a solvency card that says Obama would not exploit it. It says it would be bad constitutionally for him to do it, but that he has a heavy incentive because he wants you drones. There's no answer to that argument, which means the affirmative's legal focus has completely missed the boat. They did the wrong legal analysis. The affirmative does nothing, which means they have nothing to weigh against us. The poetry. I will concede that the 1AC was poetic. We read a criticism of poetry. It is competitive. They have conceded the poems with disabilities that there is not space for both traditional poetry and crypt poetry. Our fairest evidence is a defense of crypt poetry. The traditional metrics of poetry, the traditional rhyming, the traditional schema are all problematic because they appeal to able-bodied senses of symmetry, which is problematic. You have no defense of poetry. We have a very good defense of crypt poetry, which is our fairest evidence. They cannot no link out of this. They have said the 1AC was poetry. They have no defense of it. We have a criticism of it that it excludes disabled perspectives and standpoint epistemology and all of our uniqueness arguments. This is like game over. They conceded the AF was something bad and that we are something better. They said they were poetry. We are conceding that argument. Poetry is bad. Crypt poetry is good. And that's not just poetry by disabled people about disabled people. It is one that interrupts the traditional notions of poetry. Framework framing issues. No answer to the Cherney evidence role of the ballot. They have a lot of evidence that speaks to our role, but none that speaks to your role. Your role as an educator, your role as a critic of argument is to render ableism irredeemable. This is a conceded argument that has never been attended to, which means even if all of the stuff you think about this happening up here is important, what about you? We are the only ones that have explained what your job in this debate is, which is an unanswered framing argument. Our method makes their methods work, not the other way around. We think legalism, democracy, liberalism are redeemable, but inclusion of cripples is key. We have three mechanisms to do this. One is the poetry argument above. Second is the role-playing that the counterplan does. And third is the self-narration life writing, which is unanswered on the embodiment criticism. We have impact turn the idea of a normative statement, and our method internal link turns all of their offense. That was first our Seacombe evidence, which says that their idea of a normative universalist statement is problematic and ignores different modalities. No answer to that argument in the 1AR. They've also conceded our Harrison-Kelser evidence that indicates the way to make liberal progress work is to include disabled people in the decision-making process. I've explained above the three mechanisms we use to do that, which means we have link turned all of their framework arguments. We agree within the debate and liberalism are redeemable, but we need cripples to do it. They have no reason why the plan does that in the first place. They have also conceded the Clifford evidence that the deliberative democracy that they think is happening here is inattentive to the ways that bodies communicate and deliberate, which means their rational discourse, all of the reasons why they create empathy are a takeout. They have also conceded the Berube evidence that policy makers will not understand disabled perspective until we are there. We are invisible to them. They have also conceded the McGill evidence that indicates that the type of academic debates we have about disability studies spill over, but political science debates in the abstract do not. The framework argument, the impact access arguments, there's no answer to the good cripple, bad cripple distinction. These are conceded arguments. They have no counter interpretation on framework here, which means they have no definition. We are in cripple stand, and they wrote their plan text wrong, which is a reason why they should lose. No counter interpretation extended. The Seacombe impact that was already explained above, but the good cripple, bad cripple binary is what allows for access. I should not have to do much work here because the 1AR conceded these arguments. The counter plan, there is not a permanent answer to the counter perm argument is that it would be good for Congress to internalize the frustration of dealing with what the word cripple means. We agree with every other part of the 1AC. We should not have to reread the textual analysis. The new solvency deficit about how it's not in the legal code should be scratched in the flow. That's why I'm going for this argument, because the 2AC failed to understand that this was not just irony. That was one of the net benefits. We are kicking that argument. It's about including disabled people in the decision-making process, which is a much better way to solve the geography. Just said we create empathy for cripples here and for drone strike victims over there, which is the reason why the counterplan solves better, but the affirmative does not solve. We still cripple funding, which is sufficient. They have not made an argument that cripple does not mean to cut off funding, which was our interpretation of it. No new interpretation of it, which means we solve their Jenkins and comedy argument. We are not going for that net benefit, which means it solves the embodiment criticism. It was a floating pick in the 1 and C. We said there's no form versus content distinction, which means if we want a reason why their content is good but their form is bad, you should vote negative. They should not get a new answer to this argument. It doesn't steal the entire affirmative. You just need to either answer that argument earlier or have a defense of the way that you have performed in this debate, which means that is not impossible for the affirmative. The agonism plus institution argument is our argument. We have link-turned all of these arguments. They say that we have sole focus because of forced disclosure. They've conceded a number of arguments that deal with this. First, access is a prerequisite. What if the best answer to this affirmative would be from a cripple that is not in this space and cannot access it in the first place, which makes it impossible to true test the affirmative? It is a prior question you have to resolve. It is also key to democracy. We have a piece of Berube evidence that says that we should center disability in our terms of egalitarian social justice, which means if you want empathy for drone strike victims, start with disability. That card is shockingly good about needing it to frame the terms of who is human. That way we can't say brown people aren't human. That is why it is important in the first place. We are not a sole focus. Disclosure is inevitable for some people. I get marked
marked as disabled. I do not get to choose to come out, which means our Machalko evidence says that our bodies are always already speaking. That's also impact turned by our Clifford evidence. What is the impact? We did not force anyone to disclose. It is still up to you. Our argument is that for some people, their lives are narrated to them. Our alternative of disability self-narration in response to it and opting out of ableism is my response to the series of questions I get asked. Therefore, shouting cards say that it is mean to ask people what happened. I get asked that every day. That is the status quo, which means our alternative is the only way to solve. They've conceded it's try or die. Their Nabila survivor argument, they have that is a cherry-picking argument, and it is also too late in the game. Our argument is that the depiction of war in the 1AC is disembodied and disempowering. They have also conceded that all of the Ruby analysis about access was above. They were not very good on this. Our pressure evidence indicates their depiction of war is bad role-playing. There is no permutation, but if there was, they conceded the access versus accommodation distinction, and all of our link arguments are reason why they can't do both. What story are you telling? The story that I told in this debate is the story I've been telling all year long, which is what my life experience as a cripple has brought me to say here.
How much time do I have left?
4 minutes and 10 seconds.
Thank you.
How much time do we have?
410.
Okay. We are missing it.
Like icing the kicker here.
I know. Just want
I
to
don't
give it
know
to
anything
her.
about sports, but I know that one from.
Yeah, that's.
I actually don't know what that means.
I don't know what it means either, but I know people say it when there's like a long pause before you have to do your thing.
It's like you're about to kick a field goal or something.
I don't know what a
Football.
field goal is.
In football, when
Okay.
in between the tall posts, and then right when you're about to do it, the other team calls a timeout, so you just like have to sit there.
Where does the icing thing come in?
Basically.
Ah, I gotcha.
Ice is a cold ice, not ice is a.
not as in, you don't force the kicker to drink a
I
sip.
don't think that's what he thought.
Okay,
It is. Kappas likes bacon. Now we.
I'm sorry.
Started that.
It's alright, I'll catch up.
Okay, the collection of poems, the topicality page, the counterplan page, the framework page, the embodiment page. The negative was really good at explaining their accessibility arguments, but they haven't answered the impact to overall drone violence, which is massively unique and an exceptional form of violence. All violence is different, it is interconnected, and requires different modalities to solve it. Our impact outweighs Thursday's one is bare life, it's an internal turn. TV social death argument, they have conceded that distancing caused by drones results in psychological detachment and renders the people under the gaze drones of an omnipotent robot subject to a hellfire missile from above, which massively outweighs their impact on scope because of the materiality of that particular struggle. The beast of one is that it results in escalatory violence, the form of discrimination, the form of psychological distancing makes the use of force easier, results in an endless war on terror that has wrought endless destruction throughout the entirety of the Middle East. The 1AC is a form of tactical reform that is necessary to solve that argument. C, if the argument is true, but you should adopt the standpoint of someone who is disabled, you should also adopt the standpoint of someone, our claim is you should adopt the standpoint of the Pakistani or the family or the people who are about to get married when before the drone comes and they are under the gaze of the drone, the robot from above. The decent one is they have no answer to our geographic privilege argument. The notion that you should prioritize someone in the United States, prioritize modalities of violence that exist domestically is one that writes off the violence that exists elsewhere. It says, oh, it is over there. That is not our problem. That is exactly the logic the 1AC has sought to criticize. It reifies ethnocentrism. It reifies all of the binaries that they have sought to precludes an effective empathetic connection and proves that only we solve the empathy argument in internal link turning. Now, the first argument on the collection of poems page is that they will concede we are poetry. This argument establishes mutual exclusivity between our methods because if our traditional appeal is bad, they have impact turned our argument, and we are saying that argument is necessarily good. The standpoint argument was explained above as to why they have adopted the wrong standpoint because they have just written off that drone violence. They are part of the public apathy that exists in the status quo by saying, oh, there are larger issues, we should write them off. Oh, that isn't important. No, that violence that is occurring is not irrelevant. They might interrupt stuff, but the question is who do they interrupt it to and to what extent. Now, the topicality page, we solve this argument. The ace one is the Fisher evidence is a lot better when you give it credit for it. Says that the plan is a binding statutory restriction on the executive, that there's no risk of circumvention. The beast point is they have conceded the 1A argument about coal that it results in a deterrent effect that deters executive lawyers from circumventing the plan because a reactivated civil society is the only thing that actually does that. The conceded concession of this argument proves there's 100% solvency for the F and it is a defense of our method in the context of civil society writ large.
Yeah, they also just dropped the its argument, so it blocks all funding.
They also dropped the its argument, which is a reclarification of our plan, so it blocks all future funding that the president would do, which was we sell the pay. They don't solve it. They don't solve any of the 1AC legal method. The opportunity cost of their method was a refusal to engage in technocratic legal discussion necessary to curtail drones. Clearly, accessibility is important, but using it as a starting point sidelines discussions of questions of authority, questions of the statute, questions of whether or not the power of the purse is relevant. Their strategy of foregrounding the question of accessibility is one that precludes deliberation over a strategy of how to end drones. They haven't engaged in a discussion of alternative mechanism. That desire to foreground that is the strategy that means they don't solve any of our drones' offense. Be point is the one in our said when you privilege a rational and legal discourse. That link argument proves the mutual exclusivity between our methods, and it's a question of what privilege we access, what is legal holds merit for what is true. Even if the law is ultimately a myth, it is a myth that all people believe in. The law is not going away, and a strong civil society is the only thing that influences executive lawyers. When Congress deals with what cripple means, as the one in our said, that doesn't foreground discussions of legal technocratic discourse, which is necessary to eliminate drones. Clearly, it proves they don't teach us the skills required to challenge the overall war on terror. That is the piece of English evidence we have read. The learner evidence obviously should not be scratched from your flow as an extension of a 2EC Donahue evidence, which was literally 2 minutes long in a defense of our method, our engagement with the strategy of the 1EC discussions of authority statute, and it applies it to the real world and says that it is something that is germane to our particular social location. They say that their form of inclusion is good. It's a question of relevant opportunity cost. This argument necessarily cuts both ways because if they can include our argument, we can include theirs. It's a question of the starting point and relative impact calculus. They say they result in funding. No, they don't result in funding. Voting negative has no mechanism to do that. You result in accessibility, but the foregrounding of that particular consideration does not solve, nor does it result in the elimination of that particular source of funding. The learner evidence is also a reason why we don't need a permutation to access crip poetry or a crippled perspective, because we are not crippled and we can't pretend to be, but we can perform who and what we are for goals that extend beyond the room. Otherwise, you just reinforce the values versus policy distinction that they have critiqued. Now, the framework page, LOL, they have said the first argument is that they render the body irredeemable, the disabled body irredeemable, and then the next argument is that legalism is redeemable. How does this make any sense and proves the contradictory nature of their argument? First, they say poetry is good. We're in fact turning the focus on our poetry because our poetry is better than theirs, and our starting point and method is one that changes the constitution of how the law functions. That the Zanotti evidence, the counterplan doesn't solve for the reason above, because they haven't adequately performed it. They haven't engaged in the method of technocratic legal analysis that is necessary to solve the argument about self-narration is not sufficient, because at the end point of the politics is just landing, being happy. That doesn't teach us in this room how we look beyond that. Our geographic privilege argument is also an impact turn to that particular argument. The Harris evidence about liberalism presumes that there are not different modalities. Our tactic of strategic lawyering is something that results in more accessibility. Democracy might ignore what constitutes the body, but the question of stairs and stuff, the only way we solve it is by understanding how to do that, which the 1EC is a prerequisite to via our analysis of legal discourse. The McGill evidence does not say that your method does not spill over. Obviously, very little leaves the room. It's a question of the mutual exclusivity of our methods, which is something we solve. We don't reify the good versus bad cripple distinction, and the impacts of drones are something that reify that more. The Nabila argument was not a new claim, because that was an argument explicitly in the 2EC, and we have not exclusively used things like war rhetoric. Now, the embodiment page, there was not a floating pick. The Zanotti evidence indicates we change in our understanding modalities of power. Our argument is that the content of the 1EC is inseparable from the form, and that the form of technocratic legal analysis, as per the learner evidence, which is on fire, is fantastic on this particular question. The implication of all of their accessibility arguments is that nobody should affirm technocratic legal discourse, even if they have the power to do so, which proves they cannot access any of our arguments. They don't solve overall empathy, because empathy does not end the drones. It might be the root cause of it, but it doesn't solve the proximate source of violence that exists in the status quo. The politics is inevitable. We need to engage with it.
pleasure it's been to judge you, to know you, to see your evolution as a debater and as a person, and I think you have been a fantastic contribution to the debate community. And in this debate, I think that the problem for Michigan is that you shift away from the permutation in the link debate. I think that is a pretty profound mistake on your part. I think that the link to this position is frankly kind of weak. But when you acknowledge that the methods are mutually exclusive, you put this into a position of largely being a weighing debate. I can plow through the mechanics, but I think that they have several framing arguments that they say mean that their arguments precede yours. The first is they claim my responsibility as a judge. It gives me a unique ethical responsibility to access. And their evidence, I think, is pretty consistent with this. The Berube evidence is certainly really great about framing this in terms of how it impacts debate. So while you may have impacts to the AF that outweigh when considered by themselves, if it's just, if it's enacted or within the terms of the simulation, those would potentially outweigh, but I think that they have reasons that it's a prior question once we're evaluating this simply in terms of competing methodologies. The impact to the AF is not necessarily the impact to the methodology. Even if it is, they do have reasons why the judge has this unique ethical obligation, and why access itself is very important. The other thing is that there's a lot of debate that goes back and forth on whether or not it's AF inclusive, or the extent to which one method can potentially incorporate the other. A great deal of the debate techne for that is less important to me, not because I disregard it, but simply because the nexus question that I think is being asked is whether or not the negatives approach excludes an emphasis on policy. And I think that the negative is pretty definitive about asserting in several places, well, both asserting and substantiating the claim that they do not trade off with an emphasis on policy. They simply claim that this question must necessarily be prior. So we can have policy debates, but they necessarily have to start from the standpoint of inclusion. Now, for me, that's a reason why a permutation is a very strong argument in this case. I do not think that there is very much about this affirmative that excludes, because I think that you have your criticism of deliberative democracy is one that I view really as a supplement as opposed to a criticism. But, you are symmetrical, and that is apparently a link, and that is not really contested, and you have representations of, what's that?
Yeah, I'm if it's okay with everyone, I would prefer to just kind of.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
More than
They can, and I'm assuming everyone wants to say and hear the rest of it, but I'm just gonna go. Thank you for.
Yeah, and then I think that in addition to potentially being inclusive, not of the AF, but of your approach, of the benefits of so I think that they're able to capture many of the benefits of policy debate, although they do not have the benefits of your specific policy advocacy. And then I think that several of their pieces of evidence, like Clifford and Berube, critique a model of deliberation if that model is exclusive. Again, all of that is contingent on winning a link. For me, that is a technical product of this tactical choices made in this debate, not a reflection of their underlying truth value.
I also voted no. My big question is, I think there's a debate happening that everyone's anticipating the other side's going to be more radical, and I think ironically in the end, I have a very difficult time, and maybe just because I'm old and senile and kind of approach debate from a perspective, but I really think that both the block and the 2-hour reposition the counterplan as a word pick, which is the creative lawyering that you all do. And I was really troubled because most of the 2AR operate from a framework of where they don't get to access that. And I was more asking the question, the learner evidence is, I'm really glad people are using it in debate given its meta-criticism of it. My question was focusing more on the way in which they are not able to access the learner, as opposed to why the affirmative is consistent with it. I think we're in agreement. But this gets back to the predicate question in my mind. Like, to give you one example, I think the most remarkable missed opportunity in this discussion is, I understand that we have a lot of words that are coded that make it difficult for us to debate, especially for folks that don't self-identify. And I perfectly understand this. I'm very uncomfortable. When the first 1,000 times I heard the reference to crippling, it was very awkward and engaging. Here is the critical question. If there's no discussion of any form of non-literal meaning of the counterplan, so we spot and we move away from the discussion of humor, satire, whatever else. Literally, the question I'm curious that never gets engaged, but I think it highlights why the app is debating the counterplan in a different way than I said. It's to me, we have this case debate about whether or not that the president would fill in with other non-related funding, which I resolve. I think the app is able to largely address that for concerns. But to me, there's no more remarkable example as that circumvention argument seems to be far more indicative to the counterplan, because the debate about casualties speaks to crippling is not synonymous with killing. We acknowledge there's a distinction. And so whatever definition, to me, I think the missed opportunity is to say, what does the counterplan mean from a literal level? And part of my frustration is that the Lerner and Donahue debate, if you can effectively win for me why the counterplan can't access, because it undermines that, it becomes difficult. To me, the way the 2NC and the 2NR both, the block and the 2NR both position it starts me from the premise of the way that Mike described it was, I have an educational rationale, and to me I have to understand why that literal policy discussion is A, not creative lawyering, and B, that doesn't begin to provide the discussion of access. And there's one place in the 2NR or 2AR where I think that you all begin to make an argument saying, what would Congress know, how would Congress relate to that? I think that gets back to both of them, this is what Mike referenced, both of their Berube evidence and their other question of access begins to say, what if national debate involved these questions and started from these questions? And to me, I think if you were to then say, but I mean, we'd never get to resolve, we'd never engage the public debate, then I think your Lerner argument makes more sense, because then they become more of like the policy debaters that Lerner's complaining about. But I don't think there's much of a specificity of the link. So ironically, I think the negative is more conservative about creative lawyering and begins a question of access about the inclusion of disabilities. And I mean, it's really hard for me to kind of operate where your impact comes from, because I just disagree with the F's positioning about exclusivity in method. If they get to creative lawyer, then a lot of your discussion about empathy gets related to. So I like a lot of the F arguments, think that 1AC is really clever, really creative, but I think when the negative shifts to me, what we used to call the right, it's hard to reposition, and I just don't think the F really ever makes that jump back. I think you say Lerner and Donahue, but I sat here for a couple minutes and said, if I had to look at them and said, what are the two warrants about the way in which they're debating is not consistent with that, I don't think I can do it.
I guess I can go. I think the place where I differ, and I'm somewhat close to both of those decisions and understand them in their entirety, but I think the place where I differ is that I give a little more credit to the solvency deficit to the counterplan just simply based on the techne of the concession of the form and content influencing one another, and therefore the idea that the link arguments about bureaucratic language being exclusive meant that if the difference between the counterplan and the plan was its lack of use of that sort of language, then it wasn't as specific an engagement as I think Gordon said that he saw the counterplan as, which meant the 2-hour moment where it said the opportunity cost to the counterplan was the engagement in that sort of legal nitty-gritty, and also the relatively consistent discussion that needed to be performed and needed to be done in a form of bureaucratic language to create the proper education meant that I didn't think the negative had the ability to access that with the counterplan as much as the affirmative. And so I think this debate weirdly comes down to a negative that doesn't really have a strong ability to access an ability to discuss drones, given that it's been communicated that the way to have that discussion of drones and the way to be ethical and to reject forms of geographic privilege is to engage in an in-depth, nitty-gritty legal discussion and analysis of the way the drone regime operates. But at the same time, I think the affirmative, also due to technical concessions more than anything else, does not necessarily allow itself to have the best engagement with questions of ability. The one place where I think I differ from Antonucci, and really only a little bit because I think this debate was terrifically close, was just a question of opportunity costs. I came down on the other side of the question as to whether or not the negative could include bureaucratic language. I didn't really see necessarily the possibility of that outside of the statement that it could be inclusive, whereas I think the affirmative has done more in terms of saying if form and content are both relevant, then that inclusion needs to be performed or done, and if bureaucratic language is always something that's exclusive, then that language can't possibly be implemented because that would be a form of inaccessibility, which could therefore not possibly include bodies that are different or are coded as less able.
What do you think about the poetry, the poetry movement? The poetry.
The poetry arc, I only understood it as an internal link to like you speak from a particular standpoint argument. I didn't think that that was a way of engaging the bureaucracy in a way that would like do justice for victims of imperial drone violence.
I guess
which
I
seems
feel
like
that there's.
there's-
Because I thought about this for a second. Because before diving into the debate, I was like, is this poetry thing just a win by itself? Because Michigan could be a little bit crisper. I decided not and evaluated the remainder of the debate because I think the enthymeme, the premise that you're presuming there and missing is that everything is poetry and should be evaluated as such first. That argument is not made explicitly, however. You just say, like, they agree that they're poetry, okay, cool, they're bad poetry. That helps you to establish a link, but I do not think it establishes your poetry first argument that you're presuming.
Okay.
Right. Yeah,
Sure.
so I think that like both sides are poetry. It's a question of like what form of justice does that poetry instantiate.
Sure. The counterpoint, you say we don't isn't able to engage in bureaucracy. Is it just because we don't read like the cards that talk about bureaucracy, or is it?
I think it's partially that. I think if I evaluated this debate in terms of just like plan focus, then I think I obviously vote for the counterplan. But I think the affirmative has done a lot of work explicitly conceding negative arguments about the connection between form and content, and have made arguments about
I guess
how.
then my question is, do you think the counterplan results in any sort of discussion in whether it be Congress, whether it be here, and if so, why does that discussion, their legal discussion, outweigh the sort of discussion that the counterplan sparks about disability, which sure any evidence they don't answer is what the educators should be voting on?
I think, well, in terms of the role of the ballot claim, I think they have made answers to that, though they are not on that page or explicit to that. I think
Well, what's the answer?
they've made arguments about how the ballot and or voting should reject geographic privilege and account for victims of imperial violence, and that ought also be relevant. They've also made their own explicit role of the ballot argument that says I forget the precise phrasing of it, but it implied that should just be attempting to be inclusive and just. The last part of the decision before returning to other sorts of questions, because I think it might clear things up, at least partially, is I think as opposed to Antonucci's vision that sort of the AF was exclusive of the neg, I sort of thought the converse, that the affirmative was not necessarily an opportunity cost to a discussion of disability or an engagement with that, whereas an exclusion of all bureaucratic language meant that we could never be accountable to victims of drone violence, and that would lead to dehumanization on a relatively broad scope. And so I think that there's more of a link present, although I do think it was odd the way it ended up going down than the others do. I think that's the primary difference in my decision.
I don't understand. They're the ones that are saying it's mutually exclusive. I don't understand why the plan then.
Well, they've said
cost of disability discussion.
They've said your link posits it as mutually exclusive, and therefore your advocacy can't possibly engage in that bureaucratic language because you've made arguments that is necessarily inaccessible. And I think they've made an argument that they perform the possibility of the inclusivity of that by accounting for different voices. I forget the name of the woman whose narrative that they've read, that can still be included and incorporated, whereas I think if there was more description as to how that can be accounted for in the world of the negative, I think I might vote differently. I think I've thought a lot about the regenerate empathy, and that's a prerequisite argument. I think that needed to be explicitly connected further to the way bureaucracy operates and the way drone violence operates, and just like that internal link level. If I had a better understanding of that,
I guess just
perhaps
like
my decision.
one last question then. Do you think that the bureaucratic discussion that the affirmative wants to have is discussion in round, or is it discussion within Congress?
I think it's in round.
Okay.
Okay, I think I'm evaluating this debate as like competing poetries. It's not really, like I said, if I thought it was a plan focused debate, I think
Sure.
it would win easily.
Well, I mean, I have no idea what Eric thought his 200, so I can't really ask those questions, but okay, that makes sense.
So, I mean, I thought this was a great debate, but some unresolved issues on both sides. I saw two fundamental links here. Yeah, and really I think it's one, and it's a question of capabilities. And at the beginning I received this as like, you said U.S. federal government, and that implies a type of citizen. And that citizen is capable. It's like a link of exclusion. The symmetry argument is just, to me, a replication of that argument, you know, that because there's a rough equality among everyone who is a citizen, we are on all fours with one another. We are symmetrical with one another. I have a capacity to reason. You have a capacity to reason. I have a body. You have a body, et cetera, et cetera. I can vote. You can vote. And so I thought that, at least the way I ended up resolving that was, I thought that was one of the same category group of arguments. And I guess I thought that, and I took it at face value, but for me there were like three or four nagging issues that were problems. I agree that when I was listening to the 2 hour, I was just thinking, why are you forcing a choice here, you know, because that's just generally not the playbook, you know, and it didn't emerge why you forced the choice after the 2 AR either, so I guess that's the issue, you know, like when you're doing something counterintuitive, you want the judges to kind of have that aha moment, and I didn't. And I was worried, well, I wasn't worried, but I was like, geez, how can I vote F? But then as I started to think through it, I decided that you didn't account for case. And so while you can stimulate debates about ability and what the capable citizen is, that doesn't get to their case, to their F, to drones. It opens a debate. The Berube evidence, I don't think, says that it will get to drones. I thought that the Berube evidence said that it would include possibilities. The 2NR says it would increase empathy. I didn't have a good, satisfactory 2NR resolution on geography and on psychic violence as they relate to drones, and I didn't have the same kind of clash up with the arguments that the app is making, which I thought the app was making good particularity claims. Everyone's trying to be particular. I had this creative lawyering argument. The question is, particular about what or for whom? And in the 2NR, I thought that Eric was good at saying, we also do creative lawyering. But for me, it begged the question about the text of the counterplan with the plan, because they need to, I mean, if you've got to do some technical or technocratic language, or professional, I think professional is a better phrase for that, or frame for that, in order to do the case. And I thought that they were ahead on that score, frankly. Then I'm kind of, so then I've got to pick between like a more vital public sphere generally, but still not accounting for the case, and not that vital, because that public sphere still tends to replicate this notion of geographic distancing, of psychic violence. I don't think that the alternative resolves that part of the AF, and that's why I ended up voting affirmative.
The alternative being the storytelling or the pig?
The thought experiment, or the part of the political imagination, which is that I shouldn't distance myself from people who are being killed by drone attacks.
I think storytelling, pick, or poetry.
Why does it preclude you for engagement?
Can I talk and then we can
Sure. Okay.
I saw it very similar to Tim. I felt myself in a very funked position. I forgot we're on camera. To have to choose between literally one side having a path to eliminate drone violence, the other side having a path to increase accessibility. I don't think I should have to make that choice. I think it's a screwed up choice. I don't think it's a good choice. I don't think it's necessarily even a forced choice, but it's a choice as a result of the debates that go down. The affirmative concedes arguments about that the negative makes about the need to embody, concedes arguments about the 2NR's positionality of the crypt poetry being productive, meaning that your app was not crypt poetry, which means I don't then understand how you can capture the Donahue evidence if your argument is that poetry and crypt poetry is the way to have a better path, because crypt poetry is not the way that the simulation would go down. And the simulation might be productive to expose questions of access, but it is not necessarily productive to answer the question of drones. I think in the block there were some arguments about why drones can be addressed by questions of ability or disability, but I, quite frankly, was kind of stuck when making some impact comparisons between the two. And so I understand that there's a role of the ballot. The role of the ballot is to question accessibility and access within this space. The 2AR moved to say the Yemenis people or the people being droned are not in this space. So that's also a question of access. Right, but the point is drones happen in many different places. So yes, it could be Pakistan. But the point is that that role of the ballot did not seem to me to say no AF. It seemed to me to say what is the best path. The role of the ballot also kind of is nothing more than to say, in my mind, we have an impact. So it still begs the question, is the impact, is the pedagogy desirable? I think a different packaging of impacts, and I probably vote negative, but I do think the 2AR is sufficient to say the negative cannot solve the AF, and I don't think that there's enough to say fucking sucks to be disabled in our society that casts you that way. And so that should come before that form of structural violence should be bigger. It should be more important than the question of militarized drones. And I think if that's the lead off or something I can hang my hat on, I'd probably vote neg.
It just seems to me that is what the 2 are did throughout.
I understand you think that. I looked literally long and hard. If you can tell me where you think that happened, I can tell you I'm sorry, perhaps. I can tell you I'm a bad flow. I think the 2NR made a lot of arguments that were framed around the link question. And I agree, I also struggled with quite frankly, a lot of the newness of the 2AR impact calculus that was not there in the 1AR. But there is an impact. I've got to compare 2 different paths. They resolve 2 different issues in my mind.
I think the judges who did vote for you, I could be putting words in your mouth, but voted for you in part because they thought that you were capturing on the case. So like,
well, capturing isn't really the right expression because it doesn't do the AF. The question is, I do think that they're able to capture a large part of the value of the affirmative's role of the ballot. They do not. They do preclude your policy discussion. So the question of drone violence is. So I fully understand that decision, and that's those decisions are close to ones that I thought about constructing. I do think that they capture a large part of the value of policy advocacy generally because disability does not preclude that. So, which is my understanding of their sequencing argument really is a weighing argument. In other words, disability can interrupt discussions about policy because it does not preclude resuming those conversations once we make sure that the forum for deliberation is as inclusive as possible.
Where I differed was the concession of embodiment that you actually have to do it. You can't just say the 2 are inseparable, or the 2 can be done together. And that's
why didn't you think the Harris evidence that was extending the 2NR wasn't that legal discussion?
I don't really deal with politics. You're gonna have to tell me the argument.
Disabled people need to be included in these legal discussions. The counterplan evidence that was extended.
They need to be included because they're not included, and that was why I started my decision with them in a very funked up position. I have to make a choice between these 2 things, and I think it sucks.
I don't think you have to make a choice.
I think based on the
that
arguments
allows to defund targeted killing, that allows to have that discussion, just includes disabled people in that.
I think in an objective sense, I agree that it ought not be a forced choice, but I think the way
we're not making it a forced choice. They are.
I think that the people who voted for the affirmative thought that weren't spotting you the same we can do the cause lawyering because they, at least for me, I thought that they were winning their particularity and specificity arguments. You know, the part of legal language is nation-state language and sovereignty and very particular statutory written text, etc. There's a whole host of discourse practices that go along with speaking like a lawyer, so I think that you were winning the inclusiveness part, but part of it that you're clashing up with is that those professional languages are what are frankly part of what's exclusive. I mean, that's part of how discourse limits access. I mean, there's the physical aspect to the limitation of access in peer review, but definitely at least the discourse part. Professionalization excludes access. That's the way I receive that particular argument.
Yeah,
and the capabilities link argument that Eric made in the cross-examination, and the symmetry argument that, again, that could just be how I received it, but that's.
Yeah, I vote negative for weighing reasons, and because of the ways in which the exclusion of disability compromises the model of deliberative democracy and thus accesses some of the internal links to the app. The exclusion or the possibility of you including part of their advocacy is relevant for me as Casey, but you don't capture all of the app in that.
Yeah, sure. I just
no
did
way.
not think we precluded that discussion, whereas their forced choice does preclude one single kind of discussion. I don't think the 1AR made the argument that we can't have legal discussions. They made this. I don't know. The only thing I have about legalism or can't be creative learning is that we're not the USFG. I think the PIC does include USFG.
But it cripples funding. It's not.
Okay.
And that distinction is introduced to back away from a professional from a professional language. That's correct.
I think we want to insert it into the professional language. That is how I thought the 2NR was characterizing it, to insert cripple into these legal conversations, to spark both conversations, to not just have a singular. That's just.
But that'll be the argument, the internal link there that you're pursuing that I think would need to be articulated is that it'll be recoded. It's not such that just it sparks a conversation, but that the legal discourse itself shifts, and that will become part of the new technicality. That's a solvency argument that you're pursuing that I think very much demands articulation.
Sure.
Because that's not facially obvious.
So should the poetry stuff have been in the 2NR at all?
I think that was messed up.
Okay.
I think that's messed up. I think that's how they established what they did.
Do you think any of our offense gets sacrificed by sticking with the no forced choice perm strategy? Okay.
I think you go for the globalization element of the app. Say, they're in a giant double bind. If it is embodiment, you still get the same 2AR. If it's not about embodiment, we still can include both. I don't know. The perm, especially given the 1AR was like counter perm. No, that's us.
Yeah, I think
We created the forced choice.
I think it might have helped if it was just like the way the perm got debated and extended in 2AC and 1AR was like very quick and techy. There was like 10 different perms that existed, and I think, and then the 1AR there's sort of like some floating perms, but it's not really like specifically done as much, and I think it's just like maybe less perms and a little more explanation, just to just like, even if it ends up seeming intrinsic, just like all of these arguments are obviously connected, so something that explains what it means conceptually, in terms of, I think you did this on some of the link stuff with some like the agonism, and it's just like we don't assume, that there's only like one sort of subject who can participate, and that those definitions have to be articulated differently and constantly shift. But I think that would benefit you more than you're not gonna win a debate like this on like we have an intrinso severance magic bullet, or it's much more conceptual, I think.
Well, thank you all.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
I don't know if we announce this, but the winner stays.
Is there a decision yet, or
Not that I saw.
Is there a decision in any of the votes?
Yeah,
Georgetown beat Rutgers.
Georgetown beat Rutgers and OU beat Wake.
Sorry, I was just repeating the back.
Who was side for that?
We were affirmative.
Harvard, rather.
What was the ad?
I don't know.
New. Ernest Mark. What if I was debate like that? I think the two old people in the title, you know, and we need to go to 5 o'clock dinner and.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate it. Thanks a lot. Yeah.
You're not leveraging enough of your 1AC evidence on these questions.
Okay.
Cross white, and then there's like another card there.
Harvard. Okay. Good luck. Thanks. 1, 3, 2, 1. That was good. Wow.
On what?
That was good. Well, they did definitely the same in one of them.
Goldilocks.
6.
That's why you can't just both lies on top of it, right?
Yeah, about 5 minutes. Harvard beat Northwestern on 3-2.
There are some, there's some on the floor.
Yeah, I'm just trying to snag a